And so, with the Wonder Woman franchise now driven into a fucking ditch, Flash and Aquaman 2 in who even knows what we're doing territory, the United States and much of the world not exactly fully reopened movie theater-wise, Warner Brothers' hopes moved ahead to the Snyder Cut. Well, their actual hopes didn't. No one with any serious business sense thought that pandering to what many suspected, and journalists would later confirm, was mostly a robot-driven social media smoke and mirror campaign from Zack Snyder to get the project made in order to exact very well-deserved, by the way, payback on the studio was going to be anything other than a bizarre curiosity, and it was. So for completionist's sake, I'm including a review of that since it's definitely part of what happens next. And boy, if you needed a picture of exactly how big a chaotic mess Warner Brothers was in at the moment things really fell apart under the Zaslav regime, well, this is the chronology of episodes that illustrates that. My review of the Snyder Cut itself as it comes and goes on HBO Max, a big picture spotlight of Ben Affleck beginning his latest very gradual process of departing the DC universe officially, and reviews of the Suicide Squad, the Batman jointly demonstrating the divergent paths the post-extended universe and DC films would soon take. At this point, should I even bother, guys? I mean, in all honesty, what's even the point of reviewing something that isn't even so much a movie asking to be viewed as a story or an art object of objective quality, but as a statement of accomplishment? The objective question of Zack Snyder's Justice League isn't what is it about, how it's about what it's about, or even whether it's any good in the pursuit of either of those goals, but the fact or not of its existence. This is a thing that was at one point either denied from or prevented from existing, which was then mythologized into a thing that never existed, i.e. the so-called Snyder Cut, and subsequently memed into a new existence as something simultaneously is and is not both those things, and also a new separate thing. And I mean this not as negative criticism, simply as descriptive fact. The point was to see it through after someone else said no, not whether or not it was worth doing to begin with. And so the facts of the case are thus: after having been in what now appears to be, in fuller counting of events, less than amicably pushed out of directing Justice League and an overall charting course of the DC Extended Universe films to follow by certain elements of Warner Brothers in mid-production after the reactions came back on Batman v Superman, and the studio had second thoughts on placing its entire franchise future in his hands, Zack Snyder has to one degree or another leveraged and at times less than well-behaved internet fandom outcry, though perhaps helped more by serious charges of severe ethical lapses on behalf of his replacers by cast members and the studio's corporate parent being in massive demand of filler content for their new HBO streaming app, into an opportunity to go back and recut the film closer to his original intent, up to and including extensive new effect sequences and a handful of reshoots and new dialogue scenes, a few of which tip beyond restoration into the realm of setting up what are effectively asks for a hopefully still fervent fan base to demand further sequels despite the rest of the franchise seemingly having already moved on from that. That the filmmaker, any filmmaker, was able to wrest back control of a project unjustly taken from them and extract a measure to do justice, that they could present the original vision before the public to make their case, is both the most praiseworthy and interesting thing one could reasonably have expected to come of the entire endeavor under these circumstances, and so there you have it. It exists. I'm glad for Zack Snyder that he was able to get it done and pull it off. It makes for an interesting moment in the present discourse and will remain a fascinating cultural touchstone in the history of the genre and this particular filmmaker for years to come, perhaps decades. But it's still just not a very good movie. Sorry?
After the way I've behaved, I don't deserve to win.
Well, this doesn't deserve to win.
What?
The issue is, unfortunately, that while most agreed that the theatrical version of Justice League as originally released was a bland and uninspired film, what was also most agreed on, at least in film critic circles, was that along with that it was also suffering from most of the issues that plagued its predecessors in Batman v Superman and Man of Steel, where Snyder had much more control. Thinly developed characters, cart before the horse world building, overemphasis on lore and texture rather than personality or connection with the audience, and a tonal whiplash between grandiose pronouncement and innate comic book weirdness that constantly seemed afraid of its own shadow. What this effectively means is that apart from aesthetic differences that are superficially interesting in and of themselves, and impressive in the way that meticulous animation and after-the-fact re-editing trickery often is, Zack Snyder's Justice League and Justice League, the theatrical film ostensibly put together by Joss Whedon, are much more similar than they are different, telling the same basic story, only the new one is much more drawn out with additional scenes referring back to prior films. This one is no longer pretending to have forgotten happened, while also featuring setups for sequels that it's pretending might still happen, built around mostly the same big set pieces, only bigger, with different designs for the monsters and more blood and gore to the casual violence, the same extremely basic basic thematic conceit of the invading space monsters banking on humanity being too divided to thwart them, and the hope against this being Ben Affleck's ability to rally exactly 6 people together to tolerate each other long enough to prove that this is not the case, being afforded all the shivering grandeur of an eschatological sermon and the same baffling failings of none of the characters having much in the way of distinguishing personality traits or depths of relatability to the audience or to each other, outside of their shared straining under the weight of all this responsibility that's been heaped on their expertly chiseled shoulders. Batman is an aging, angsty, feeling down about his life choices guy, and more or less outright says he's funding a superhero paramilitary outfit because he'll be damned if he's gonna do this MARTHABOX shit by himself. Wonder Woman apparently really has just been walking the earth with no other defining character traits than being very, very sad about the loss of Chris Pine's penis for 100 years. Cyborg is angry because his father didn't go to enough of his football games when he was a human kid, and even angrier because when he used mad science to bring him back from the dead, he also got super robot internet powers that basically make him Iron Man, but also the Matrix if it was a person, so he might just be God now, but he has to be shiny and he doesn't like that. Aquaman is just kind of a standoffish dick for no reason, because if you let Jason Momoa show even a hint of charisma, he'll overwhelm the rest of the movie. And the Flash is just sort of doing a comedy impression of what boomers think Gen Z kids talk like, so people won't notice that if your power is to move really fast, as expressed while everyone else moving in slow motion, while Leonard Cohen sounded like needle drops crank on the soundtrack, that means you have the same power as every other person with a speaking role in a Zack Snyder movie. Mostly, they all just seem tired. Of all the different origin stories fussed over for generations to justify DC Comics' pantheon of demigods starting their own clubhouse to hang around and do their super stuff together, other than it would be neat and people would buy comic books about it, Snyder's vision of the Justice League is the first one I can recall effectively positing that everyone was just worn out and done with it, and figured consolidating the brand was a good way to spread out the workload. There's an excruciating bonus scene where another character pops up to offer their services to Bruce Wayne, and he practically rolls out of bed to tell them they should come back when the HR girl is at her desk, the kind of thing the Venture brothers used to do as a joke about plot tedium, now loaded in for the real thing. In terms of big fancy newness, we're meant to be impressed by the expanded presence of villain leader Darkseid and teases of Planet Apocalypse and the evil end of the New Gods character showing up, intended to be the looming threat for the second part of all of this back before the film was originally shooting and the studio had already talked Snyder's ambitions down to a more manageable let's see how the first one goes to immediately follow Batman v Superman. The changes and additions here, though, are, despite some impressive CGI character work, largely superficial in nature and does little to alter the course of the film proper, whereas the theatrical version involved dreary villain Steppenwolf scouring the earth for recently unearthed doomsday artifacts called MARTHABOXes in the wake of Superman's passing. In the new version, a different-looking Steppenwolf, now marginally recharacterized as a beaten dog henchman of the real baddies, is, well, he's still doing exactly that, but in a twist you'd think someone with 4 hours of movie to fill up would find time to make more complex or at least compelling, discovers midway through his search that the insignificant Earth actually just happens to be the lost random planet where his master Darkseid suffered his one and only defeat and managed to lose a different, more powerful doomsday weapon somewhere on its surface, which means basically that a threat that was already characterized as the end of the world is now even more so the end of the world, because another more evil guy might show up if they don't stop the first one in time. Oh, and we also get another post-apocalypse nightmare vision from Batman, but this time with a cameo for Jared Leto's Joker that, for whatever reason, occurs after the threat of all that is presumably eliminated and does basically nothing but give Leto an excuse to be in the movie. As said, I remain unclear what takeaway anyone was expected to have here other than, well, this certainly exists. There have been instances in the past, and will certainly be instances in the future, which I can, in fairness, imagine this can only help with, of studios wresting control of a production away from its director under dubious circumstances, and where getting to see the alternate version yielded not only the justice of seeing a vision realized, but also the triumph in the face of why changes were made in the first place. Films have been taken and recut to serve studio politics, to neuter a message or meaning intended by the filmmaker, or to punish a specific performer by removing their screen time because some technique or stylistic choice was considered too radical or unusual. Here now, if we take Zack Snyder's Justice League as representative of what his final word on the subject would have been, it doesn't look as though there was anything quite that substantive at play at either end. Whatever else might have transpired between filmmaker, studio, or cast, apart from the gore and some F-bombs and general length, both versions of the film are empty, joyless slogs with flat, uninteresting characters, whose jokes aren't funny in the Whedon version and whose dour Wagnerian grumblings have no weight in the Snyder version. It doesn't look like the studio was looking to erase anything other than their own bad decision-making in hiring Snyder in the first place, because he simply wasn't suited for the material and they realized they'd made a mistake, which isn't his fault, but also isn't really a scandal. It's the way it went down that's the scandal. A story that's forgettable and then cut to an airless breeze is an anesthetizing bludgeon at the length and pace of a miniseries, and while Snyder's undeniably greater skill as a visual stylist and action director compared to Whedon are inarguable, it's all in the service of not much when you don't care who's fighting and why. The entire thing is like watching a compilation of animated cutscenes from the campaign mode of one of the Injustice games, with the same tone and level of cinematic quality to the dialogue, unfortunately. Now look, I gave the original quote-unquote release 1.5 stars back when we were doing star ratings, so generously, I feel like this one should get a 4 out of 10, which really should be a 3, but I'll extend propers that yes, Snyder and his reshoot team put together a few solid good-looking new battle set pieces that, don't mean anything but definitely look cool. And also, apart from whatever else supposedly happened with him in the studio, which does sound shady as hell and should definitely be investigated and brought further to light, even though there really isn't much on the page other than exposition for Ray Fisher's extra scenes as Cyborg, you can really tell he was working hard to do something with the part, and he's clearly a fine actor who deserves a shot with better material on a project that doesn't screw him over. So, okay, 4 out of 10. Are we done now? Can we all just move on to other stuff? Even just other Batman stuff at this point? Please? So the new Spider-Man movie's pretty good, huh? Yeah, I know, the first new episode back after a bit is supposed to address things and have some kind of more profound introduction, especially since we're all once again mired in this pandemic shit. And honestly, part of the reason you got a flashback episode 2 weeks ago about the amazing movies instead of this then was because I realized I was just rehashing things I said before and was better off actually just reposting than repeating and rephrasing myself. I mean, it's been hard, right? Am I allowed to just say it's been hard? Rhetorical question, I realize. It's my own goddamn show. I can say whatever I want. Rubber baby buggy bumpers. Whatever. What I mean is it's been really hard these last 2 years, and even though, thankfully, I've never got COVID, I didn't lose anyone in my immediate family or circle of friends to COVID, the pandemic caused significant and probably long-term damage and delay to my professional plans, work life I'll be recovering and rebuilding from for a while, but that's nothing compared to what so many other people have been dealing with, and I honestly feel guilty feeling anything other than grateful that we got the fucking Nazis out of the White House and I didn't die during this whole disaster. Yes, definitely, but it's still been hard, right? I mean, I can't be the only person who feels like sometimes it's just a hard push-pull between get back into your normal healthy routine and does getting back into what was your normal healthy routine mean accepting that you lost multiple years of planned personal progress and who knows how much momentum because the whole world decided to go to shit all around you?
This is really crazy and inaccessible and maybe too dark. Maybe to them, but not to us. Cool. Cool. Hot. Hot.
I mean, again, I feel like an ungrateful, narcissistic, oh, poor me asshole having any kind of resentment while being lucky enough to be drawing breath in 2022, but for fuck's sake, I had real things in motion before all this went to hell, and then, oops, sorry, back in 2015, these lovely people were feeling economic anxiety, and surprisingly short number of dominoes later, we're all living through the stupider version of a Resident Evil prologue, and I don't know how to be anything other than sad and angry about it all. Still, I am trying to be less consistently depressing about it, though, because for one thing, yeah, I'd like to see the Patreon numbers start climbing again, so stay tuned and we're trying. But yeah, anyway, the new Spider-Man movie is pretty good, huh? I mean, I only gave it a 7 out of 10, I know, but I felt like that was what it deserved, fairly, because it's not a masterpiece. I actually think it's a little on the long side. Act 2 is a little draggy. I also appreciated all the fan service and callbacks, but I'm a grown-up, so I can recognize the difference between my nostalgia nerve being prodded and actual good storytelling.
Nostalgia is bullshit. It is a brainworm that makes adults regress into children who argue about Ghostbusters while the world fucking burns.
Hey, don't say things about Ghostbusters you can't take back.
And again, for the most part, it's a damn good example of the form, so there's a lot of both to go around in it, but folks, please, having stuff from Spider-Man 1 and 2 does not make it an equal to Spider-Man 1 and 2, and it's not. It's good, I liked it a lot, it's far and away the best of the 3 solo MCU Spider-Man movies, it's the best not animated Spider-Man movie since Part 2, it really nails the stuff it needs to nail, but this thing right now about, hey, it should be nominated for the Oscars, I mean, okay, in the sense that a lot of just okay to pretty good movies get nominated for Best Picture, and a few kinda not good movies have won Best Picture even, sure, I guess, but we're really gonna go to the mat this time and try to act like we weren't all just massively overinflating our reaction to this because it was the first thing everyone went back into theaters to watch collectively in what we're now calling post-COVID, whether or not it is, and we're all just glad to have seen a movie again. Look, I'm Mr. The Academy needs to recognize popular cinema and there's no reason to stigmatize genre films or blockbusters, but the 2 times recently that a superhero movie could be legitimately in the running for Best Picture were The Dark Knight and Black Panther, respectively. Maybe you could make the, wow, good job pulling that off long-term argument for Avengers Endgame in addition to those, but No Way Home is a very good, maybe even in the context of its moment and franchise, great MCU entry, but Best Picture, even in an anemic year like this, I could maybe be in favor of it as a symbolic nominee, sure, but that's about it. I mean, it wouldn't upset me to see it nominated. Hell, if a few more film snobs get upset about it, I'll even root for it. But seeing the concept get this much traffic kind of baffles me, to be honest.
Marge, I'm confused.
Now, that being said, it doesn't baffle me half as much as seeing the so-called reappraisal happening for the amazing Spider-Man movies following Andrew Garfield turning up for his bit in the movie. I mean, I understand people generally felt that he caught a bad break there, which I can more or less agree with. He was a young actor, it wasn't totally his fault, he was working with what they gave him, etc. But No Way Home had barely been out for a day, and I was already seeing people clamoring for Sony to somehow restart the series on his side and finish out that story, or have his version of Spider-Man be the one that turns up in Venom or Morbius, and get him and Emma Stone back somehow to have her Gwen Stacy resurrected as the live-action Spider-Gwen or Ghost Spider or whatever. And guys,
What is wrong with you people?
I'm sorry, I just don't know how else to express that sentiment. There's no sense to be made there, none, and I'm not sure it had crystallized for me just how profoundly this whole sensibility and moment had been bugging me until I saw the stuff bubble up about Ben Affleck, Michael Keaton, and Batman now at the same time. For those of you who are so lucky to not do this for a living or otherwise don't have to care about these things until they start to advertise them at least, this isn't, as far as anyone knows, about The Batman, the movie with Robert Pattinson, which I also think looks kind of, I've seen this before, as these things go, but at least in a straightforward way because they're keeping it separate from everything else. This is about the ongoing DC Extended Universe movies, i.e. the sort of continuum of films and series branching off from the failed Justice League movies that were supposed to have been reshuffled through some kind of soft reboot by now, but hasn't because of the pandemic delays and Warner Brothers merging with at&t and then that falling apart, and now who even knows? Just a horrible ongoing train wreck disaster of a thing.
Please disperse! Nothing to see here!
That supposedly still, as I will remind you, I was one of the first to predict would be what had ended up happening 4 fucking years ago, on track to get an attempted fix from a time travel continuity management bullshit set to go down in the long in development Flash movie, which we've known about for a while now was going to use the Back to the Future 2 but with superheroes and the grandfather paradox plot of the Flashpoint miniseries as a mega handwave to give the studio a do-over on all the things they feel they'd screwed up or audiences hated or actors wanted to move on from in the current DCEU, a list which has now only gotten longer after more bad movies, box office disappointments, pandemic delays, and systemic corporate failures that at this point looks very likely that the incoming When the Dust Settles plan is aiming at some radical shit.
People want cuddles!
Including Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill being out as Batman and Superman, Justice League and its adjacent features either wiped from continuity or moved on from entirely, and while Robert Pattinson's Batman in the real world but without other super people stuff movies get to keep on and be their own separate thing, Affleck's Batman gets replaced in the DCEU timeline by Michael Keaton, the 1989 to 1992 Batman, apparently coming back first in Flashpoint and then permanently to play an older mentor figure in the vein of Batman Beyond to the already announced Batgirl as the new face of the franchise going forward, possibly as complement to the new Supergirl also debuting in that same movie, the internet's reaction to which has been about what you'd expect.
It's a caped crusader like you've never seen before.
Awesome sauce! Oh, and here comes Batman!
And this time, he's a girl. Yes, it's the all-new Batgirl show.
Batgirl? It's her show? But I want the moody loner Batman!
Now, I'm planning to do a whole other show on the implications of all that because it's complicated, lots of different angles there. Suffice to say that people losing their minds because the characters are women or because the terrible SnyderVerse movies aren't getting more installments or idiots being idiotic. But yeah, a lot of other stuff, but specifically for my purposes here. To the people who are furious that Ben Affleck doesn't want to be Batman anymore, who are petitioning Warner Brothers trying to make him be Batman again, who are all geared up to torment not only the wonderful human Michael Keaton, but also this, by all accounts, perfectly nice-seeming young woman who is clearly very excited to be playing Batgirl because you think it will cause Affleck to be Batman again. Why will you not let this poor man just not play fucking Batman? He says he doesn't want to do it. He's told you many times now, both through the defeated-looking interviews he was giving during and after the productions, and in the honestly not good performance in the films, that he's just not into this. It turned out to be a bad idea. He's saying openly he had a bad time. I mean, I get that you might disagree, but at a certain point this becomes weird, sad, and a little bit or a lot scary and possessive.
As a loyal viewer, I feel they owe me.
What?
He says he doesn't want to do it, despite the attempts to make it all about a director versus director thing in the press, and to be clear, Joss Whedon can go to hell. It was clearly the overall situation. He's gone right back into making the kind of movies he's always been better at, and has apparently pulled off the rare midlife crisis boomerang all the way back around to Bennifer, which, good for him, honestly, seems happy, hope for the best. And guys, you've had so many Batmans. They've got a whole other actor playing Batman right now. They're doing another animated Batman. They're making the guy who was Batman in the 90s, who was now in his 70s, be Batman again, just to give you a nostalgia erection.
Everything I loved as a kid and hated as a teenager, I love as an adult.
And I'm sure he won't be the only other Batman in Flashpoint, because after No Way Home and Multiverse of Madness, every fucking franchise is going to do this now until we get sick of it. But seriously, it's bad enough we can't let anyone in this industry just not have a superhero role on their CV. We can't just allow this one man to say, hey, I tried being Batman, I don't want to do it anymore.
So, this is really it.
Yeah, looks like. At least you can say you had a good run.
A great run.
Now, the thing with Garfield, okay, that's more complicated because it doesn't seem as clear whether he actually wants to do it. Clearly, those movies were as miserable an experience to make as they were to watch, maybe more so. But he's also got big theater kid energy, and he hasn't grabbed a franchise role to replace it with yet, even though you gotta figure he's the second phone call for everything the Chalamet kid says no to, right? And the fact that he's not a hard no when people ask him now, yeah, that does make me think that not only are Sony and Pascal Pictures exactly desperate and short-sighted enough to keep diluting their own half of the brand by cramming him into Venom 3 or Morbius or Kraven if they actually end up making that.
I have nothing left. Except Spider-Man.
I bet they've at least already talked to him about it, and even though there's zero chance of any of those not being terrible, he'd be stupid not to take their money, and they're going to offer him a lot of it. And you know, if it's something he wants to do, fine. If people really want to see him do it or feel they missed out on a hypothetical better movie in that version of the franchise, I mean, I don't see how that could be possible, but okay, feel how you feel. But I've never been able to wrap my head around this faux sense of righteous anger that there was some huge miscarriage of justice that this one actor was in a pair of movies that got poorly reviewed because they weren't very good, the movies, I mean. It's not like people were blaming him for the amazing duology failing. It didn't seem to damage his career credibility. The whole time that horror show was playing out, he was working with acclaimed filmmakers like Scorsese, doing awards-caliber movies like Silence and Hacksaw Ridge. He's been near universally praised as one of the great young stars of his generation, even with having headlined 2 giant bombs and almost torpedoed a franchise on his resume. That doesn't exactly almost happen. He's even earning rave reviews for his turn as Jonathan Larson in Tick, Tick, Boom this year, and that's long after even the theater community kind of soured on Rent as a pop culture artifact, so you know they actually mean it. He's doing fine, basically, as far as I can see, and it never seemed like this grave injustice that he was having to go through life with the stigma of being told, oh no, the person who played Spider-Man second wasn't as good as the person who played Spider-Man first.
How do you sleep at night?
On top of a pile of money with many beautiful ladies.
Just asking.
Look, as someone who is now approaching middle age and seeing firsthand how tough it can be to stretch when pop culture gets a certain idea about who you were supposed to have been, even with a very, very minor level of notoriety, maybe I've got a different context here, but I think about how deleterious not being allowed to move on from a part like this apparently was for people like George Reeves back in the day, or how a lot of the Star Trek actors famously got trapped doing only that, whether they wanted to or not, and whether they were okay making a living on the autograph circuit or not, and the visceral level of entitlement involved here when this stuff isn't good and didn't work in the first place just speaks to a really dark impulse from where I'm sitting, you know? If they want to be done, let them be done. Let things that didn't work not have worked, and let people try other stuff. Yes, even if you're sure it could have worked if only they'd listened to you. Especially since they're not gonna listen to you now anyway. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture. And now to the Suicide Squad, which is not called Suicide Squad 2 because Warner Brothers would like everyone to forget that they made Suicide Squad 1, even though the Suicide Squad kind of expects you to remember the plot, several character relationships, and at least the basic premise of Suicide Squad 1, so it can dispense with all but the most cursory setup and literally drop the audience and characters into a dare-you-to-keep-up opening action sequence that establishes an appropriately audacious tone of wild ultraviolence and expertly interwoven pitch-dark comedy and cartoon slapstick that the rest of the film only sort of manages to consistently follow through on, maintaining the audacious aesthetic but gradually backing away from stepping too far off the moving sidewalk. Maybe that's a function of how fast the culture moves now. The turnover happens too fast for anything of this size to stay edgy from the time it's begun to when it's released. Conceived in the aftermath of both its own studio releasing a chopped-up version of what probably wasn't that great of an original film in the first place, part of the ongoing rolling fallout from the disastrous beginning and even more disastrous attempted midway course correction of the early DC Universe franchise, and rival Disney's similarly shameful, though now thankfully corrected, firing of director James Gunn over a fake outrage campaign generated by right-wing left-wing political operatives, the pseudo-sequel reboot instead arrives in the aftermath of even more turmoil and uncertainty, as, thanks to the pandemic, in the time it's taken to make and release it, Warner Brothers has passed into and out of the hands of at&t and been sold for parts to Discovery after a garbage fire of mismanagement, and the future of the brand is now in more trouble than ever. The movie, though, it's pretty alright. Yeah, this guy should have been a general for this kind of ability to manage other people's bullshit in a crisis, I'll tell you. Anyway, if you missed the first one, or forgot, or just never cared, our premise goes like this. You know how DC Comics superhero stories have some cool good guys, but like a lot of really great bad guys? Like how even just Batman by himself has dozens of bad guys with fun nicknames and gimmicks everyone remembers, and they're always the best part of the movies or TV shows or whatever? Well, what if there was a covert government program that takes those guys out of prison when they get locked up and has them do illegal Black Ops paramilitary missions to get time off their sentences? So like the Dirty Dozen, but supervillains. You might say, oh, so like the best spin-off exploitation concept for secondary comic book properties ever, basically? And this has existed for decades? Something a smart movie studio that owned it would have been making like one a year of since that first Batman movie back in 1989? Well, yeah, except Warner Brothers has only done 2, and this is the first good one. Anyway, whatever brought us to the lack of needing a true Act 1 turns out to be something of a blessing, as the Suicide Squad is able to leap to its main set of immediate goals, laying out a mid-1980s canon film-style scuzzy weirdo action archetypes on a sketchy mission in a rando Latin American tropical jungle nation during a chaotic military coup movie as a broad canvas, whereupon Gunn can alternate between burning through, blowing up, and occasionally injecting an admirable level of actual pathos into DC's D through Z list of background material, complete with Sylvester Stallone himself as the voice of a CGI character and Alice Braga as the character you expect Alice Braga to be in a version of this movie without any comic book stuff. The nominal premise is the squad is being dispatched to destroy a dangerous experimental weapon that the island nation's prior government was keeping locked up, and the US no longer trusts the now hostile new government not to unleash. No prizes for guessing that there's more going on there, and whatever it is will throw a wrench in the squad's already shaky as hell unit cohesion and convoluted sense of duty and self-interest. As one expects from Gunn after his success with Guardians of the Galaxy films over at Marvel, the whole enterprise really does feel like an ensemble piece, with the main characters all getting a solid balance of exposure and depth once it's sorted who the main characters actually are, though it's quickly apparent that our hero part this time goes to Idris Elba as Bloodsport, a ruthless mercenary assassin who pulls increasingly absurd weapons out of thin air like a high-tech Elmer Fudd, while doing an otherwise dead serious riff on the world-weary gunslinger bit opposite Joel Kinnaman, returning as field leader and exposition guy Rick Flag, returning only thing we did right in the first one, Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, Daniela Melchior as Ratcatcher 2, aka the weird cute one who says weird cute things, David Decimal Kane as a sad sack polka dot man, and full-bore comic relief in the form of John Cena's ideologically confused Peacemaker, and the aforementioned Stallone as the instantly iconic Nanaue, aka King Shark, who is a shark. To say much more about what's going on would be to give too much away. The strength of the thing when it's working is that effectively copy-pasting the squad characters into a standard B-movie action plot outline of American good guys blast their way through the background of a fictional Cuba-ish, Panama-esque, Grenada-like mid-coup country with familiar from the news jungle, red light district, rebel camp, and capital city backdrops as staging grounds for shootouts and missions, leaves plenty of room for a loose improvisational feel of the proceedings so that the anything can go wrong will go wrong plotting feels organic and the players all have plenty of room to work out their best material. The film is at its best when the characters and Gunn are both operating free from the constraints of adhering to any kind of narrative or moral coherency and making mischief to make it, reasserting the premise that Viola Davis as the squad's Pentagon boss Amanda Waller deploys them more like living hand grenades than precision missiles. There's a surprising amount of upfront acknowledgement of just how dark and also how darkly funny the premise can be, carried all the way to its logical extreme up front in terms of Waller's willingness to spend and take lives, and the various squad assignees' eagerness to do the taking since they are, after all, bad guys through and through, which is why it's so unfortunate that eventually that same tone gives way to still enjoyable but less meaningfully distinct heroics and good-evil delineations as it wears on. Not that the utterly absurd final action blowout isn't delightful on its own terms, it very much is, and kudos to both Gunn for going with something so conceptually and tonally ridiculous and the studio for saying, yes, we get it, let's do it, but getting there involves a few too many here's what's really going on, good-evil twists that almost feel exactly reversed from where they ought to be. Shouldn't be on the other side of this? Isn't it more in line with the setting and more interesting if does the right thing about but for the wrong reasons because trying to avoid the spoilers here. On the same lines, the second act gets significantly derailed for a subplot devoted entirely to Harley Quinn, which, in a film that's otherwise happily cutting back and forth between parallel action across days and hours to juggle its multiple characters and moving parts, gets weirdly sectioned off into its own beginning, middle, and end in what can't help but feel like a case of, look, Margot has a huge production deal with the studio, it's one of the only A-list actors who wants to make movies in this franchise with us, Harley is one of maybe 3 characters we haven't ruined as theatrical brands at this point, so she gets her own mini-movie inside the movie, okay? Make it work. Not that Margot probably isn't as much fun here as she was in Birds of Prey, or that when her lengthy digression arrives at its punchline, the actual point isn't appreciated in an okay, I guess that was specifically overdue in this case sort of way, but it definitely throws the rhythm of the thing off for a bit. Still, there's quite a bit to recommend here, even if it's not the strongest work from anyone involved. The action sequences are big, nasty, and inventive, the mix of old school over-the-top bloodshed and modern comic book absurdism is consistently impressive, and while the two Guardians films are in no danger of being dethroned as Gunn's most impressive work as the Mr. Emotional transcendence of mainstream pop superhero cinema, it's nonetheless compelling to see him and the actors draw out real humanity in the talking shark man, the girl who talks to rats, or the sad weirdo whose seemingly laughable power of throwing polka dots at people is revealed as a gradually more brutally sad, debilitating condition as the story wears on. Likewise, it's also a hoot to see him unshackled to indulge the naughtier mean streak from his days in the trauma grindhouse whenever the action needs to remind us that we're watching an R-rated film. So call this a 7 out of 10. It's not a home run, but it's a big improvement and a very good time. Let me save you some time right at the start here. No, it's not going to be a 10 out of 10, and if that's in any way surprising or upsetting to you, then when you're done scream-crying into your pillow, for the love of God, please go find the most grass ever and touch all of it. Tuesday afternoon. I'm recording a review for The Batman, a movie about the Batman, starring the Batman, narrated by the Batman, who talks like this, like the Batman, because he's the Batman, and this is how we decided the Batman talks, especially to himself, inside his own head, or while transcribing a journal, over a slow pull-in of downtown streets at night, to describe how bad the city is, and how the bad guys are all afraid of the Batman, which is who he is, the Batman. Is this narration voice pissing you off? When it started up first thing right away, did you immediately think, oh no, is he gonna do this the whole fucking time? Like, am I gonna have to sit here for however long this thing takes and listen to someone drag out a narration gimmick that was deliberate anachronism when Watchmen did it? That everything from Lego Batman to how it should have ended to the Watchmen series is mocked into oblivion. By now, they've seriously just unironically oh shit, he's really still going, huh? They're really seriously committing to this for all of the Batman? But I'm not, because it's murder on my vocals, and I imagine you get the point. Yes, Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne really does start out the Batman doing what you can really only call Rorschach narration in this context, and I really immediately did sink down in my chair thinking, oh no, is there really gonna do this the entire time? But, well, it is a choice. What's even more a choice is that he stops doing it for long stretches of this long movie, so every time he starts up again, you get the, oh, right, yeah, they were doing this surprise feeling all over again. That's not to say that it's 100% a bad idea or doesn't work at all in this or that context, but as is the case with almost every other notably good or notably less good thing about the Batman, it makes me more curious to know at what point in the extremely lengthy process of reconceiving, retooling, rewriting, recasting, redirecting, reuniversing, and apparently reshooting this thing, that this particular idea dropped into the process. The Batman may not be an epic superhero feature in terms of scale, save for some increasingly out of place and not great looking big action set pieces for the most part that feel bolted on and stretched out to remind everyone which genre this is technically supposed to be, but it's a very, very long and even longer feeling one, stuffed with thinly drawn but colorfully performed characters playing out subplots within subplots in a detective story that's working overtime at being situationally complicated to compensate for not actually working as a proper mystery thriller. Nearly all of its narrative components run functionally in isolation, but joined together, they don't so much flow as fit together because they have to. I stopped trying to figure out what kind of act structure I was dealing with after Natural Ending number 4. It's kind of got a 14-act structure, maybe? And it wasn't until the third instance of what ought to have been a transformative character journey plot point resolving itself a scene or even a couple minutes later that I pinpointed the familiarity I was feeling. They're calling this a movie, and I'm sure they wrote it as one, but what Warner Brothers has released as The Batman feels more like a 4 or 5 episode HBO Max show streaming all at once, and binge was not the proper format for this story. As to the content of said story, in lieu of jumping back to another origin, this time we're skipping Batman Begins and jumping directly into its more or less and even more grounded and gritty realism do-over of The Dark Knight, where Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne is already on year 2 of his crime-fighting mission when a serial killer calling himself the Riddler starts leaving notes specifically for the Batman behind at crime scenes as he not John Does his way through a who's who of Gotham City political and underworld elite, which, wouldn't you know it,
Message!
turn out to be one and the same. Allying himself with Zoe Kravitz's cat burglar with secrets, Selena Kyle, he attempts to get the head of the killings by figuring out connections to John Turturro and Colin Farrell as mobsters Carmine Falcone and the Penguin, but then faces the realization that he may actually be out of his depth, i.e. his detective skills aren't actually that great yet, and his privilege may have come with too many blind spots, which means things go south fast when Riddler targets Bruce Wayne, the legacy of the Wayne family themselves, and look, if you know your Batman stuff, they're basically doing Hush crossed with Long Halloween, but without all the other villains and most of the comic bookish stuff scrubbed out, so, figure it out. Thematically, this is all pretty solid stuff, honestly, for all these still ultimately pretty justified worry that this was going to be yet another exhausting retread of the grim specter of justice Batman the films have been churning out for decades now. It's mildly refreshing to realize director Matt Reeves is effectively signed on for an interrogate and deconstruct production where, to the extent that such a disjointed film could be said to have an arc, it bends in the direction of breaking down a lot of the most tiresome and troubling things about the property, turning Batman gets called out for being a rich guy who says he's a detective but mostly just beats up the underprivileged into the point it's aiming for. I mean, let me be very clear about this. I do not expect that it will go unnoticed by those most apt to be enraged by such things, that this version of Catwoman specifically name-checks white privilege among Gotham's incurable psychic cancers, and I can tell you firsthand that a Batman movie looking to conceive a 2020s vision of realistic evil incarnate and landing on edgelord conspiracy streamers with guns is so guaranteed to invite a horrifying response toward a studio that's frankly no stranger to targeted harassment when it comes to this genre. I kinda have to respect it, yeah. I just wish I could respect it while also saying it actually worked all the way through, but like most of the other good things in here, and to be clear, there's a lot of good, the score works, Pattinson and Kravitz are both terrific, set aside any doubts you might have had that they can't hack the action scenes, it looks very handsome, even if the too cute by half scene you remember from Seven or Zodiac, but now the Batman is there aesthetic starts to get old fast. Farrell all but vanishes into the Penguin, and while there's some notable stretch to the superfluous action where you can almost hear the producers going, you just did 20 minutes of drama, so this car chase better be epic, yeah, there's some good stuff in there too. The main recurring problem is you can see both the points the Batman is aiming for and the ways in which those points could be racked up into something great, but you can also see it get pulled back down instead by the nature of its own existence. See, it's almost thrilling to watch a version of this chase the billionaire vigilante fantasy thing is kind of gross and retrograde as a concept, and Bruce Wayne would be a terrible person in real life business further than most other versions of this character thread ever go, but that just makes it ring more hollow when it has to eventually Deus Ex utility belt away to go, yeah, but, and get out of that same narrative because the organic ending, i.e., you're right. This whole idea was insane. I'm going to therapy. Alfred, start giving this money to the poor. Jim, defund yourself because you should not have let me keep getting away with this. It means you can't make the Batman 2, 3, 4, whatever, and you can't do that. Or rather, you can. I mean, you meaning Warner Brothers specifically decoupled this series from the rest of the continuity so you can do whatever you want with it, so you can do that. You just didn't want to, apparently. And that reach extending the will of the grasp ends up being an endemic weakness to the whole rest of the enterprise. The people playing the politicians and gangsters are doing such a good spin on the realistic movie version of their characters, it can't help but feel like unintentional bad comedy whenever the dialogue has to flip back around to what we recognize as goofy cartoon bullshit about Gotham City, Arkham Asylum, the Riddler. When 95% of the scenes are so committed to grounded, gritty reality, it makes it more ridiculous when Pattinson and Kravitz ragdoll off the sides of buildings or bounce back after fighting off whole armies of professional thugs not permanently crippled. The police procedural stuff is so ordinary and mostly sensible that I couldn't not get yanked right out of the story at a pivotal moment when a perfect okay, take the stupid mask off chance present itself, and none of the cops do that because they don't. And yeah, people, including me, look past bigger logic leaps and other stuff in this genre all the time, but that's usually because there's a talking shark or a wizard or something, so you're not supposed to take the world seriously. It's not standing there pretending to be the Godfather this whole time, except for when it needs to justify a merchandisable plot point. And I'm not trying to be down on this. If anything, the Batman is better than I thought it was going to be based on its, well, that didn't work, so here's Christopher Nolan version again, but through a red filter marketing campaign. But I did struggle to keep my interest intact, and while I appreciate what it's going for, especially on the thematic side, I understand that the target audience here is teenagers who've never watched the actual neo-noir crime thrillers this is referencing and will be blown away by how grim and portentous everything is. Fine, okay. But reheated dress-up leftovers is still reheated dressed-up leftovers, and it just feels kind of depressing if after all this time, this is really all we can think to do with this material over and over again. 6 out of 10, not that it matters, everyone is seeing it anyway, but I wish it was better. Or different. Or both. So I honestly thought people were either going to be more excited or more bent out of shape when it came to the Batman, but it seems like even though the movie was a pretty big hit, and a few people got pissy about exactly what you'd expect, it was almost exclusively the performative outrage grifters who nobody actually takes seriously, so yeah, a bit of a surprise. I mean, do people not care? I don't think that's it. People obviously watched this. It was a big hit. Is it actually subtle and nuanced enough and enriching and intellectually fulfilling enough of a viewing experience that the average audience as a whole was capable of experiencing it as an experience and sitting with it rather than incorporating it into the loud and stupid interpersonal meaningless conflict that comprise our daily existence? Sorry, I can't even pretend to finish that thought with a straight face. Was it that all the most obnoxious voices in the popular culture who'd otherwise have been making hay about woke Catwoman or incel stereotype Riddler too busy figuring out which side they were supposed to be on to pwn the neo-libs now that the topic du jour is an actual war and not a stupid culture? Holy shit, that actually seems to be it, isn't it? Oh my god, I was joking, but that's actually the reason, isn't it? Jesus titty But really, I think it's got more to do with the whole decoupled from continuity thing actually having a tangible effect on the way these things are received now. The Flash or Flashpoint or whatever they end up calling it hasn't even officially dropped a real trailer or come out to definitively establish that it's really happening yet, but it feels like everyone has picked up the vibe that Warner Brothers is really moving ahead with some version of a DC movie strategy whereby the shared universe continuity is going to keep on trucking as some yet-to-be-defined reboot focused on a newer era version of various properties and offbeat, lesser-known stuff filmmakers have more free reign with that's been working for them better so far, while the A-list brands get cordoned off into separate standalone spaces to attract the auteur-director set DC Black Label style, and as such there's less of a sense of discourse sausage to be made of this, since this one can only prospectively affect its own sequels as spin-offs as far as we know so far. I mean, at least for now. In any case, I already ran my actual review in which I said it was fine, I guess, but what stuck out to me in the requiring spoilers to explain sense was how lacking in substance its finish was for something that was so stuffed with plot and took so long to play out. So I wanted to take some time here and lay out where I felt like this one rang a little hollow for me, maybe also for you, who knows.
How can you even say that, Dad?
Didn't like it.
Peter, it's so good. It's like the perfect movie.
This is what everyone always says. Whenever it's
Explain yourself. What didn't you like about it?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
What?
And look, it's a new movie, so let me say in advance, I'm doing what I can on the visual front, but there's only so much you can do to visualize a movie that's this brand new, so please enjoy montage and repeated trailer clips. Anyway, spoiler warning in effect from here on out, and to cut right to the thesis, thematically, The Batman is a movie that actually really does not seem to care that much for the Batman as a concept, but it either doesn't seem to know how much it doesn't like its own subject, or doesn't have the conviction, for whatever reason, to actually come right out and say so.
Why are you protecting a psychotic clown who treats you like garbage?
Ask the guy who fucks bats.
He doesn't do that! Jim!
While also masterminding a scheme by his army of internet followers to stage terrorist bombings and a mass shooting massacre to flood the city and kill the new mayor, because dagnabbit, this movie will mix as many newsworthy metaphors as it can find to make sure you know it has smart politics, but also the most up-to-date, mainstream, palatable politics, i.e., wow, there's a lot of conspicuous centrist liberals decided they like the police again ADR voiceover from Commissioner Gordon in Act 2 and 3, huh? I bet if they'd had to delay this another week, the KG Beast would have been in there again. Oh yeah, did you know that's who this random useless dude was supposed to be in Batman v Superman? Yeah, that was totally real. Look it up. Oh, also, the reason Riddler has so many people to kill is that all the cops, politicians, and gangsters running Gotham City now apparently use the death of the Waynes and subsequent investigations into and cover-ups about as means to enrich themselves and work out who is in charge of the whole corrupt power structure. And Catwoman is here ostensibly because her roommate went missing, but really because John Turturro is her secret father, because that's also a plot point from Long Halloween, but mostly because if she wasn't here, this would have like the least women present in terms of total screen time of like any Batman movie ever. Seriously, Sam Peckinpah would be going,
God damn, y'all need to get some bras in here.
But here's the thing, a lot of this is sort of moderately edgy and subversive of expectations about the Batman mythology and whatnot, but none of it is really a twist in terms of the plot of the movie. Most of it is just right out there, or in a video Riddler just releases for everyone to watch midway through, and the rest of it he just confesses right before the big extraneous final action scene, just very matter-of-factly, here's who I am and why I done what I done. Instead, the twist turns out to be why his plan doesn't fully succeed, but also why Batman fails to stop it right away, so the plan mostly plays out, and why he still kills a ton of people and basically destroys a bunch of Gotham City. And this is where the Batman actually seems to be trying to do something really interesting and provocative and unique and even sort of bold with not just this specific property, but the entire superhero movie genre, holding up not only Batman individually, but the Batman-style archetype and indeed the entire extra-legal vigilante savior fantasy trope to the cold light of day for practical, philosophical, and ideological introspection, and finding it to be actually kind of wanting.
Jim, what's wrong? It's Barb. You know, she's sleeping with someone else. The signal is for emergencies.
this. You see, for a lot of the movie, people keep trying to tell Bruce Wayne that he's not doing Batman the right way, even people who don't know he's the Batman or the other way around. Alfred tells him he needs to not be just the I'm vengeance guy. The new progressive mayor tells him Bruce should be a philanthropist like his family used to be. Catwoman explicitly calls out Gotham's elite for not just being corrupt but blinded by white privilege and makes sure to include Bruce Wayne among that list, and even he isn't sure he's actually making a difference, being basically a consulting detective who helps the police and also beats the shit out of street thugs. But, big twist, the one person who doesn't think he's doing a bad job is the Riddler. Riddler, as it turns out, underneath his own nominal gimmick and nickname, is just a Batman fanboy from the internet who thinks the violent costume guy who beats people up and calls himself Vengeance must be more or less on his side about, well, everything, which kind of makes sense, really. As it turns out, the riddles, the clues, puzzles, ciphers he's been sending his messages addressed to the Batman weren't about Riddler taunting him. In his mind, he was communicating in code with what he thought was an ally and rooting out evidence of Gotham's elite corruption scandals, up to and including Batman snooping around, placing two prominent victims directly in Riddler's crosshairs, and he only fails to kill his main target, Bruce Wayne, because he never figured out that that's who Batman, really is. So yeah, Warner Brothers went looking for a topical in 2022 conception of relatably terrifying human evil to menace Batman and came back with sad, angry dweebs from the internet who take Batman way too seriously. I can't imagine how they landed on that one.
You know they just did a 3-episode arc where Harley beats Penguin, Riddler, and Mr. Freeze using nothing but her Mary Sue powers?
Are you sure you haven't seen the show?
Yeah, 'cause I'm not a 12-year-old girl.
But in twist number 2, it's eventually clear twice over that Riddler just being a regular, obsessive, kinda smart guy and not a mastermind who could guess Batman's identity means Bruce probably should have caught him a lot sooner than he did, but didn't because, well, everyone was right and he's got a lot of blind spots, was way too concerned about revenge punching versus actual crime solving, and in general is not really that great of a detective as yet. Specifically, he and Gordon both turn out to have wasted a ton of time chasing a bad lead in circles based on misunderstanding one of the clues because neither one of them can speak proper Spanish and don't realize it until Penguin has to correct their grammar, and at the end of Act 2 it's implied that he overlooked a clue that Riddler intentionally left for him, one that might have prevented the big final disaster entirely even because he didn't recognize the function of a working-class maintenance tool. Finally, in case the point had not yet been laid down with a heavy enough hand, when Batman finishes beating up the last of Riddler's henchmen at the big climax, the cops unmask the guy and ask him his name, only to have him repeat Batman's "I'm vengeance" catchphrase back to them.
Message!
So when you lay all that out, from where I sit, it's kind of hard not to posit that the Batman does not actually like the Batman all that much. At least not the version of him that exists for 90% of its runtime, and also not the general overarching Batman concept of the wealthy guy who fights crime fist first because he's getting revenge for parent murder. Not only does it present a Year 2 Bruce Wayne who fails to stop a not-that-sophisticated crime spree because he's too self-involved, doesn't have a broad enough socio-cultural understanding of the city he's operating in, and basically needs to check his privilege. Hey, don't look at me, she said it. If he wants to be the Dark Knight we're generally more fond of, it explicitly presents the inspirational effects of vigilante heroism as being insane weirdos on conspiracy forums will stockpile guns and try to murder everyone, and there's no mistaking what real-world events and persons are being evoked there. Hence why Batman has the big, "oh no, what have I done" reaction when that guy delivers the "I'm vengeance" line at the end and has to make a big symbolic death and rebirth baptismal dive into the floodwater before he can reemerge as a literal torchbearer who now leads people out of darkness instead of the other way around, because by that point subtlety has been dragged to death behind the Batmobile. The moral and thematic arc of the Batman is that Bruce Wayne went about his whole Batman thing the wrong way and made everything worse, and even apart from him personally, vigilantism is an innately corrupting idea. Thematically, it's an anti-Batman Batman movie, which in a sense is probably the only true logical endpoint for doing a story like this in a realistic way, which is why it feels kind of unfinished, if not dishonest, for it to not actually follow that logical endpoint all the way through. In the on-the-page narrative arc of the movie, Bruce Wayne, as Batman, has failed at basically everything he set out to do. He hasn't avenged his parents' actual death. He didn't make a meaningful impact on crime or corruption in Gotham. The city is in a worse place than he left it. Like, literally, it's underwater. One of the few people he actually cares about almost died. The Batman as a symbol didn't make criminals more afraid so much as give a worse type of criminal inspiration to be even worse. The honest, organic ending of a story like that would be generally for the protagonist to go, wow, I screwed up. I need to do something completely different, i.e. not be the Batman because the Batman is a terrible idea. I mean, that would at least be the kind of bold, brave, unexpected holy shit shit, didn't see that coming ending that would make The Batman a companion piece, and frankly, in my opinion, a superior film, to Joker in terms of being a standalone, filmmaker-driven, non-continuity, just-as-it-is feature, which I thought this was supposed to be. It's certainly what they've been pushing it as, but apparently not. They've instead already decided that this is now The Batman of Earth 2, and it's going to get a spin-off, and they're already talking sequels. So instead of what feels like its only thematically natural ending, the big summation of it is, well, that stuff all sure did happen, I guess, which has the effect of making the preceding 3 hours of not altogether bad filmmaking feel like a kind of a lot of build-up to not really all that much in retrospect. Which doesn't make this a bad movie by any means, just not as good as it otherwise might have been.
Marge, I'm confused. Is this a happy ending or a sad ending?
It's an ending, that's enough.
I mean, it's still also too way goddamn long. The political stuff is well-intentioned but heavy-handed and cheesy. The car chase is bad and the Joker thing is dumb, but that's review stuff. Ironically, trying to split the difference between a proper thematic payoff and franchise prospects ends up making it feel just as much, if not more, like a product in service of franchise management than the even more openly brand-driven material otherwise produced for the DCEU proper or by the likes of Marvel Studios and Disney. Heck, in some respects, you could even argue that the Deadpool movies had more sincere follow-through to their own narrative commitments, and the second movie in that series undoes its own stakes as a post-credits gag.
So dark. You sure you're not from the DC universe?
I'm Bob, and that's the big picture. And now, we enter the home stretch. AT&T has sold Warner Brothers off for parts to Discovery, the Flash and/or Flashpoint finally begins coming together, and the news begins piling up around it so regularly, I stop trying to edit scripts together and instead post the first of a few ramble-style videos, which I actually get a few calls wrong about the situation. So here's a semi-condensed first look at that. One thing I'd like to mention here, the rambles in this case, the first one and then the one that follows the next chapter, I've cut down significantly even as they're still pretty long. If you watch the original uploads, you'll likely notice that a lot of what's excised material isn't just me repeating myself or apologizing for the same kind of run-ons and lack of updates. Stuff I've talked about that length otherwise are the places where I've talked about Ezra Miller, and for that reason, I want to be as clear as I can be. At the time, and elsewhere further back in the videos in this retrospective, not all of the facts about the situation with Ezra Miller's case were either available, and were both areas where we did some jokes and asides aimed at the studio, but in reference to that situation, with a flippant or comedy tone that, in hindsight, wasn't appropriate. And also, while that discussion we did make of the case itself, I think made a proper effort at giving the benefit of the doubt to Ezra Miller themselves, in light of the prospect that the media and culture in general might have jumped to negative conclusions about a prominent non-binary identified actor of note, I believe we may not have given enough space or reference also to the victims of the abuse allegations in question, and outright crimes in question, and even, however unintentionally, seem to suggest a lack of proper support for their position. That's not acceptable either. Bottom line, the presentation is more streamlined here, and this is the presentation that I think more accurately reflects that. But if you're wondering why we've cut that down and taken some of the material out, that's why. Not hiding anything. When I say something that I no longer stand behind in the past, I say so. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that we got it 100% right in leading up to this, so this is a more accurate presentation than that, and also more watchable to the degree that it can be. And also, these are serious matters. And, you know, there's a line between doing a humor show that sometimes talks about serious matters and treating those matters in an unserious way. And we don't always get it right. And when you don't get it right, you have to try to make that up, in my opinion. You know, just joking is an explanation. It's not an excuse. I've gotten things wrong before. I'll get things wrong again in the future. When you do, you have to own it. Because otherwise, you have no standing when other people get it wrong. Boy, there's going to be a lot of cuts in this. Also, if you see me looking off screen, that's either me looking at the notes, at part of the news feed, or at the microphone, all of which are off camera, off of the green. And trying out the new mic and the new camera setup to try and get the tinny sound that some of you have seen in the recent reviews under control. Question of where is the Flashpoint episode, which I know I said is coming, and it is coming. It's written. The problem is, and I'll be honest, that episode has been rewritten about 6 times at this point, give or take in complete scripts. It's probably closer to like 15 or so, because every time it gets close to done, it changes, because the news on what's going on with that fucking movie changes, because either WB corporate management gets shaken up, or a new thing gets announced that you have to take into consideration, or Ezra Miller gets arrested. And honestly, not only does that make it difficult, it makes it tiresome, and it turns it into something that you almost don't want to do. And sometimes, just in the general covering Hollywood industry stuff, covering celebrities, covering people as though they're not people, and I'm not, asking you, oh my God, please feel bad for rich, famous people, but, just in general, consider that not only the people up on the screen, on TV, but the people below the line who make these things, and everyone in between that, are all people. And things happen occasionally that throw that into relief. And it's the same thing that people have managed to do with Ray Fisher, who got genuinely, more so than anyone else, who was involved in all of that terrible nonsense that happened between Warner Brothers, Zack Snyder, everyone involved in the disaster, the rolling disaster that happened as a result of the Zack Snyder DC movies not working. They clearly course-corrected in the wrong way by having someone come in, several people come on board who did not do a good job, did not look after their cast properly. There are allegations of abuse and misbehavior, and the whole thing just turned out into an even bigger disaster in a whole other direction. On top of everything else, they were clearly not sensitive remotely to what was going on with Zack Snyder at that point in his life. But, everyone else in that whole scenario that got screwed over, everyone else, all of the other actors, all of the other people, the producer, like Joss Whedon, unfortunately, is going to survive that. Okay, he was already rich. All of those executives at Warner Brothers, they should get in trouble if the allegations of all of that are true, are going to come out of that, okay, golden parachutes, whatever. They basically blew up their own studio causing this disaster, got it sold off to at&t. That merger didn't work, so it crumbled, and they got sold off for scrap to Discovery, which we're about to discuss. But they're all going to get their parachutes and their pensions. They'll be fine. The other act, Gal Gadot, fine. She's going to get to keep making movies even after Wonder Woman 1984. Most of the other actors going on to other things, already very wealthy. Ben Affleck is much better off not being Batman. He clearly understands that. Everyone else is going to knock out of that just fine. Ray Fisher, this is basically his first big movie. He gets pulled out of obscurity to come in here to get his break. Gets, from the sound of things, genuinely fucked over. He does the brave thing, which no one else generally in his position does, which is stand up for himself against all of these other much more powerful people. And what's happened is that unfortunately his very legitimate grievance has been seized upon and corrupted and tainted by this whole wave of resentful, entitled fanboy bullshit that doesn't really care about him and really does feel to be using his grievance, attempting to use his genuine grievance in order to get what they want out of a movie studio in terms of comic book superhero continuity. And that's bullshit. That's not how that should work. And it makes the coverage of this stuff tiresome. Makes this shit a giant pain in the ass. Because then you sit down to say, okay, I'm going to finally, finish up, get this script written about Flashpoint. Let's talk about what's going on with this Flash movie that still eventually has to come out for Warner Brothers to try and get anything fucking done with this. And no sooner do they get things really set up like, hey, we've got it. We got Michael Keaton back. People are excited. We've got it taken care of. Hey, we won an Oscar sort of thing about it. Maybe that'll help us out. That lasts about not even 12 hours, and then Ezra Miller is beating people up in a bar and then breaking into an apartment and threatening people again. What do you know? It sounds like Ezra Miller, whatever else is going on with that, whatever else they did, and it sounds like they did some pretty bad shit, they should be getting help instead of trying to star in the relaunch of a giant tentpole franchise. Like, any discussion of that happens isn't framed through, hey, this is, like, really troubling. This should be spoken about. Instead, it's framed through, what does this mean through Flashpoint? And it gets framed, especially here on YouTube and on certain fan sites and on social media, it gets framed not through, wow, that sucks, that's terrible for the people they apparently assaulted, for whatever might be going on with them, but instead through what you can tell is almost giddy anticipation in certain slices of the fandom culture, because people, whatever they think of Ezra Miller, look at it as, oh boy, this means maybe they'll have to stop Flashpoint, and it means that they'll have no other choice but to restore the SnyderVerse, which is not gonna happen. And I don't say that as like a hopeful thing or a copium on my part. I say it because if it was gonna be done, they would have done it at this point. One thing that could have happened to get the Snyder Cut made and finished and come out, i.e. a global pandemic shutting down all theaters and DC being starved for content and at&t looking at their slate and saying, well, do you have anything that's mostly finished that we could throw some more money at and release as a giant extended miniseries to try and make some money back while nothing else is coming out? I mean, that improbable thing did happen, and you did get the Snyder Cut out of it. Regardless, even if that were the case, think about that after you think about the actual harm happening to actual people, and not just the people Ezra Miller allegedly assaulted, the people who have already started working on the other movies that are going to get shut down in this scenario, which is not going to happen. Because I gotta tell you, the last time that I started to get a little bit tired of coverage of stuff like this was when the Fox-Disney deal was happening. And yes, I was as excited as everyone else to talk about, hey, the X-Men might be coming. Here's how that could work. Any attempt to even talk about the fact that, yes, we're all excited that eventually Wolverine can meet Iron Man, Wolverine can fight the Winter Soldier or whatever, swallows up any sincere attempt to talk about the fact that millions of people lost their jobs at Fox because jobs became Blue Sky Studios goes away, in the most obvious example. Yes, I know everyone was glad that they did that last little short where Scrat finally gets the acorn and the canceled in-production Nimona movie landed at Netflix finally. That was great news. But, that doesn't give everyone their jobs back. Who's getting fired and secret factions in studios? Is there a Whedon wing? Is there a Snyder wing? Who's on which team are you? This is like Twilight shit for people who are armchair quarterbacking. This is Team Jacob and Team Edward for people who are pretending to play studio manager from their chair, who don't actually know shit. As the most recent example, bringing us up to date, up to date, Jesus Christ, is this article in Variety that just came out because to Well, to recap, for those who didn't remember how this all happened, Warner Brothers basically has driven itself into a wall on the corporate management side. The DCEU is a financial and corporate disaster. Despite the movies that have been successful, most of them have not, and no one knows what the brand identity is. The thing that was going successfully, the CW shows that have been, they're not that expensive to produce. They make money in overseas, and they do well on streaming, but the actors are getting ready to move on from those. Supergirl ended, Green Arrow ended, Flash is coming to an end, Batgirl had a bunch of troubles, sort of winding down on that end. The movies have been hit or miss, and then COVID happened, so now no one even knows. Streaming has been going sort of well, and meanwhile their other big marquee brand, the Harry Potter franchise, oh wow, their big prequel push sucks. People hate it. It's not doing great at the box office, and the person that gets to have final say over what happens with that brand is leading a global transphobic hate movement. So, great. Warner Brothers is very unlucky. Very, very, very unlucky. Like, the next thing that happens to Warner Brothers is Elon Musk will try to buy it. That's the next logical step for Warner Brothers, is they need to be really hoping, some weird billionaire is not like super into one of their properties and just wants to run it. Because Elon Musk buys Warner Brothers and casts himself in Space Jam 3 is something that at this point is on the table. Not so much in logistics, but just in terms of how bad Warner Brothers' luck is. But anyway, so Warner Brothers merged with at&t, because at&t decided they wanted to try and be a big damn media company. Giant disaster. They lost a fortune. They sold Warner Brothers off for scrap to Discovery. And this is the second time this has happened to Warner Brothers. This is also what happened when they merged with Time Warner. Warner Brothers has used up the genie. All of their luck is gone. And it's really amazing that this studio still exists in any kind of form. So Warner Brothers got sold off for scrap to Discovery, and now Warner Discovery is rebuilding itself, basically into some kind of new form, which has meant a whole bunch of people have gotten fired. And a lot of things are being consolidated because Discovery already had a whole bunch of corporate brands and a whole bunch of verticals and a whole bunch of subsidiaries and departments that are now all getting integrated and put together. And if there's redundancies, people are going to lose their jobs on all ends. And once again, this gets reported. See, I just did jokes about it. I just had a big laugh. All of those laughs I was just having, the sound in the background is people cleaning out their desks, people having to sell their houses, people having to move back, and it sucks. And thinking about it, now I feel bad. And I should. But, you can only keep so many thoughts in your head at the same time. I'm sorry if you're one of those people that lost your job in the midst of all this. I hope it works out. Because again, the only thing that gets reported on is, all of these executives who, where are they going to go? Where are they going to land? And wherever they land, they're going to be fine. They're rich. They get parachutes and pensions and trampolines and soft landings. Most of them are going to go off to other places, start their own things, and get picked up. Regular people aren't. And it sucks. But that's the subtext. The main text is this Variety article, which comes out this past week, basically, like days before I'm recording this, as I try to look at it and say, fuck it, and rewrite the Flashpoint article again, get to the point where I just said, nope, can't do it, and instead I'm recording this. In this article, new guy named Zaslav, who's the guy in charge of Discovery and head guy in charge of this whole rolling disaster, basically comes out and gives a quote to Variety where he says he wants Warner Brothers, he wants to restructure the DC universe, movies and TV stuff specifically, and he wants it to be more like Marvel, and he wants more movies like Joker. And those are the two quotes that wind up in the Variety headline, which, gives everyone the reaction of, cue the quote.
Everyone loses their minds!
Like, if you want to make comic book movie news following social media, people instantly generate a whole bunch of articles that think they're about something that actually are about nothing because there is no actual data or information in this piece. Mention the words, be more like Marvel or be more like Joker. which is what they did. Now, what the article in the news actually is just a continuation of other news that was coming out, which is basically, you know, the running list of who was staying and who was going at Warner Brothers and DC, which is basically a list of not much changing. They removed a few executives, but people are still in charge of the things that they were in charge of before, and there's not a lot changing, which makes sense. Because whatever restructuring is going to happen with the DC Universe movies, it's going to happen based around at least 2 years, maybe more, worth of stuff which is either finished and waiting to come out, or in various stages of production still coming out, or has been announced and getting ready to get produced based on what has already come out, that was all sitting in the can during COVID. Like, that's the reality of this, is everything, any piece of news that you read about studios with franchises and big movies coming out for basically the next 5 years, you have to process through a lens of they have a ton of product sitting in their warehouses that needs to finish coming out before anything happens. Everything is still on a delay timer. Jurassic World 3 still hasn't come out. Marvel still has a bunch of stuff coming out. And DC, through Warner Brothers, still has a ton of stuff coming out. So there was no news in this article because Warner Brothers doesn't have news yet. They still have Shazam 2, Aquaman 2, both basically finished movies, have to come out. Flashpoint, as far as anyone knows, has been shot, and they just keep reshooting it every time they have to change something for whatever their continuity plan is. So that still has to come out. Batgirl is apparently made, and they've already started talking about a sequel. Hey, how about that? That happens the same time that article was dropping, so I guess they're satisfied with that one. Blue Beetle is in people forget that they greenlit that. Yeah, you're getting a Jamie Reyes Blue Beetle movie. Susan Sarandon was just cast in that. That's interesting. Black Adam is in the can. That's been shot. That's been made. That's waiting to come out. Black Canary, I think, is still at least something they're planning to do, the spinoff from Birds of Prey. Margot Robbie has, I think, 2 more Harley Quinn movies at least in her contract, one of which may be another Suicide Squad. I don't know. The Batman at least has 2 sequels planned. Whether or not Matt Reeves is going to come back for them, I don't know, but they signed Pattinson, I think, for 3. The Penguin spinoff of that, and maybe another spinoff. They decided not to do the Gotham PD thing, but they may do more. And even though Suicide Squad did not necessarily do at the box office what they wanted it to do, it worked on streaming, and Peacemaker was a big ratings win on streaming, and I thought it was fucking great, by the way. I should run a review of that at some point, but Peacemaker was really fucking good. And I'm pretty sure they greenlit another season of that. So Warner Brothers has a lot of DCEU stuff to come out still that they don't know how it's going to be received. They don't know what their product is yet. So all of this talk about how we're going to restructure and what we want the DCEU to look like, especially if they're talking about now doing a Marvel-style model where Marvel basically works retroactively, where they do the one thing at a time and then they change their plan based on what the audience responds to, other than a broad outline of where they're shooting to for each quote-unquote phase, which can still always change. They don't know what they've got to sell yet. Some of those movies could be bombs, some of them could be huge hits. Like Aquaman 2 is a priority for them because Aquaman 1 made $1 billion worldwide, and no one was expecting that to be as big a movie as it was. Never mind a bigger movie than most of the other things in their first wave of stuff. But otherwise, the only main new piece of news in that article was Zaslav saying, allegedly, that he doesn't think Superman, Batman, that kind of thing are leveraged as well as they could be, which, no shit, everyone thinks that they aren't doing enough with Superman. That's why they keep trying and failing. If it was any other property that didn't work as often as Warner Brothers has managed to make Superman not work, they'd just stop trying. But it's Superman. They know it's theoretically valuable. They just can't make it happen. Batman, obviously, is over-leveraged. They can't stop making Batman stuff. And they've made a Batman movie. They still just don't know what a Batman movie actually looks like at the box office when it's not still coming out of a plague. You know, I said this on Twitter and got a bunch of attention for it, and I stand by it, which to me felt like a no-brainer, but I guess people needed to hear it. They keep saying, oh, we need to get a Kevin Feige to run DC. And people say, oh, get a comic book writer to do it. Get the DC Animated Universe people. Get well, not Jeff Johns anymore, obviously, but once upon a time, people wanted him for that job until he did it. Have Paul Dini and Bruce Timm do it. J.J. Abrams knows how to run a universe. Maybe him. No, you don't want showrunners and you don't want writers. You don't want nerd culture celebrities to do it. I love Kevin Smith too. I don't necessarily know that that's the kind of person that you want. You want a producer. You want someone, like Kevin Feige, who went to USC, studied for years under Lauren Schuler Donner, knows how to run business logistics of a studio, and also likes this stuff, but isn't necessarily obsessed with it to the point where it's going to override the business decisions. That's what you need. It doesn't need a visionary. It needs a boss. And they don't really have a boss right now. But of course, none of this matters because that article was made for not generating news. It was made for reassuring investors and ginning up content on social media, which is one and the same, because if you generate news and you generate chatter, it jumps your stock price and it gets investors excited and it makes people say, oh, things are happening. This is big. People are excited for one reason or another. And the way that you do that is you cause sensations. And saying we want the DCEU to be more like Marvel and we want more Jokers is a way to get people talking, because that makes some people really, really happy and makes some people really, really upset, even though it actually means nothing. All it means is we want to make a bunch more money, because Marvel makes a lot of money, and Joker was the last thing that Warner Brothers put out that had a huge profit multiplier and cost next to nothing to make. Everything else did sort of well and cost a lot of money. Joker did really, really well and didn't cost him anything, especially because they spread it out over a whole bunch of other production companies, so they didn't actually make as much as they should have made off of it. But on paper, Joker is a $1 billion movie that cost a lot less than that, whereas The Batman is a movie that is, if it's profitable, it's only just so at this point. And what I mean about that article trying to generate bad faith takes is, because you've already seen it happen, that the minute that said this needs to be more like Marvel, people lost their shit and got upset, but also it needs more Jokers. Saying that is basically a catnip stuffed inside a dog whistle and blown to get the outrage machine beardo YouTube crowd to throw together videos about how based Zaslav is going to cancel Batgirl and end the woke Hamadaverse and bring in the edgy proven content that we know works like Joker and maybe the SnyderVerse and the Ayerverse, with the big thumbnails with some lady from the Hillary campaign crying and the yellow text and this poor actress playing Batgirl pushed off to the side and what you've seen, you know what I'm talking about. Big emojis with anime teardrops, you've seen this shit. Which likewise drives an entire alternate reactive set of takes on social media and everywhere else of people who are perfectly fine with or looking forward to more stuff like Batgirl, which I think looks interesting, or Birds of Prey, or other such material. So that drives interest on that end as well. It drives both, basically primes both pumps, gets chatter going on both ends, even though if you look at it logically, these two things that are being said in the piece, we want to be more like the MCU and we want more Jokers, if you read those literally, well, those are incompatible statements. The MCU is basically set up to not make movies like Joker, singular, one-off, weird, bizarre, experimental things that live on their own. Joker can't happen in the MCU. That's not a thing that they're set up to make. And likewise, Joker exists because the DCEU is not the MCU. So those two things are incompatible statements. Logically, they don't make sense, unless you are not reading them literally, but you're reading them in studio speak, where we want to be Marvel reads, we want to be Marvel because Marvel makes billions of dollars on every movie. And Joker is, well, of course we want more Jokers. We want more movies that make $1 billion. That makes sense. And even in the article, Joker is not described as, we want more movies like Joker, edgy, violent movies riffing on Scorsese projects. No, it's described as a movie taking advantage of singular individual characters throughout the canon. That's also basically what Marvel does. So really, it's only saying one thing, which is we want this to be more like Marvel, which means we want it to be more integrated and turned into a money machine. Which, no shit, genius, that's what every studio wants everything to be. We've been watching well over a decade now of every single studio trying to turn every single brand into the Marvel Universe. And clearly, part of being vague about it is because they know any kind of actual giant brand reshuffling is going to take the several years that they are already going to spend releasing all the stuff they've already made. And during that time, there is no telling that audience tastes could either completely change or what they're releasing could all turn out to be the next big thing. There is no telling that Black Adam or Batgirl or Blue Beetle are not the next Iron Man or Guardians of the Galaxy, whoever asked for this, oh, turns out everyone waiting to happen. You just don't know. And you don't know on purpose because these are giant studios making giant financial moves and they don't want you to know about it until the movie comes out because, hey, what a thought. The point is supposed to be watching the movie, not being entertained by the machinations of studio politics, which I, for one, really wish that I could get right the fuck back to, which I hope to do in the next version of this, which will actually be about, hey, this is what we know sort of about Flashpoint. This is the reality of the situation of where Warner Brothers seems to be. Here's what I think might happen based on what we know is coming, and also, you know, some stuff that's happened in the comics that might have inspired some of this. Who knows? You'll see. I think you're going to like where the episode is going. So, cool stuff incoming. And until then, I'm Bob, and that was a rambling-ass big picture, yeah. So yeah, a lot of that turned out to be spoke too soon, changed right away, otherwise wrong, or you ain't seen nothing yet. See a lot of the stuff involving Ezra Miller. In June of 2022, 2 months after the release of the Big Ramble episode, Warner Brothers Motion Picture Group COO Carolyn Blackwood and Chairman Toby Emmerich, two of the supposed villains of the anti-SnyderVerse era, stepped down from their roles at the changing company amid the continuing push to reorganize the studio itself and DC Films brand in particular, with Walter Hamada soon to follow. In the press, it was soon openly discussed that David Zaslav was seeking a Kevin Feige of his own to remake the studio and DC Films specifically in the Marvel image, whatever that means. In August, Zaslav would cancel the release of the completed Batgirl movie, supposedly as a tax write-down, along with multiple other finished or near-finished features from the studio, a move widely condemned in the entertainment press and by fans, but celebrated by, well, guess who was celebrating? To date, at least one of the cancelled films, an animated crossover between Scooby-Doo and Crypto the Superdog, has leaked online. With summer winding down, the chaotic saga of the DC Extended Universe would ultimately turn toward the collision of three separate long-running narratives, one of which was so long-running it actually predated the entire extended universe itself, that being the release of Black Adam featuring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in a role he originally signed to play well before he was anything like an established movie star or a now powerful Hollywood player whose own production company was making very public moves to secure a seat at the table for itself in the power vacuum that was the leadership of the DC Movieverse. The others, what to do about Ezra Miller and The Flash, and related, what is to become of the SnyderVerse actors like Henry Cavill when all of this reboot action finally hits. Lost amidst all this talk, of course, was what it would mean for things other than fanboy one-upmanship and meaningless continuity questions, the lack of attention to which would finally push me to say just fucking enough, as you're about to see in this final assemblage of videos. A second edited down ramble episode, the Flashpoint Paradox Big Picture, wherein enough got said, and for the sake of posterity, the Black Adam review. See you on the other side. Everyone has things that I think that, lessons that they need to learn that they never learn. My version of that is don't set like goals ahead of time for this particular part of my business, because I always end up not doing them, which is supposed to be the opposite of the way that works. Busy every time I've said, okay, this is how it's going to happen on this schedule. It never works out. Man, there's going to be a lot of edits in this. I said that I was going to do the Flashpoint episode, the preview of it, and then do the episode and then move on to stuff without talking about any more of the stuff behind it because I was sick of talking about it, and then it would come right away. Clearly that didn't happen because of, the story just kept changing, and it was clear that I was going to have to talk about it again, and I got sick of following it, and the whole thing became very tiresome and really demoralizing to talk about and follow, and I was going to almost wait for Comic-Con. To see if Warner Brothers was going to announce anything. Now it looks like Warner Brothers isn't even showing up. They're not doing a DC booth at Comic-Con. They're not, I assume they're going to announce more DC stuff at Comic-Con. I have a feeling that the no DC booth there is kind of a feint. I expect that they're probably going to be announcing, like, this is what DC is now called within the company. There's probably a rebranding going on. There has been a bloodbath at Warner Brothers as the new guy in charge of that company, Zaslav, has been just cutting. So I assume that this is part of a big rebrand in the company because I can't really imagine that they've got nothing to show. They've been at, like, Dark Crisis has been going on the comic side. They've been doing stuff. They screened Batgirl. Supposedly the feedback on it is very positive. They screened The Flash, whatever they're going to call it, and supposedly the feedback on that was extremely positive. Unfortunately, the feedback on that being very positive has been sort of overwhelmed by all of the business with Ezra Miller. They had a big trailer for Black Adam, which looks very cool. I think that looks very cool. I think that looks really cool. You know, we still unfortunately have to talk about, that's some reference. We have to talk about Ezra Miller. I'm not sure, but I may have misgendered Ezra Miller in the lead-up parts of that. I'll try to edit it. If not, I apologize. Sorry. Now, so the problem that they have going for them with this Flash, whatever it's going to be called, is about threefold, really. Now, on the one hand, it seems like they're destined for bad news. And there's a thing called the Sunk Cost Fallacy, which you've probably heard about, which is that you start thinking that because we've put so much into this, we've got to keep putting more into this so that it's worth it, which is almost never true. It's always better, usually, to cut your losses, cut bait, and start over when something's going wrong. Like we've gone this far, we might as well keep going is almost never a good idea. If you have the option to return to base and regroup, it's almost always a good idea to do that. We might as well see it through is almost never a good idea. And that's the sunk cost fallacy. We've sunk this much cost in, we might as well. It feels like you should because it feels like you've given up, but it usually is not true. Now, on the other hand, everyone buys into the sunk cost fallacy, so it's like religion. It's not true, but everyone believes in it, therefore it becomes true. And also, on practical terms, they probably have deals with actors and deals with the various unions and people who've put things into making the movie, which basically say that they can't not release the movie, that they've put work into it, that they have to release this. They've paid Michael Keaton money to be in this movie. They got to put up. They've paid all of these other actors. And also, again, the reaction to the movie is apparently positive. Warner Brothers apparently has a Flash movie that they like. The reaction to it is positive. People see, again, I haven't seen the movie. I don't know. I have not talked to anyone personally who I know or trust that has seen this film. But the word coming out of the test screenings on this is they've got it to a point where it's not like, they're not saying it's a huge smash. They're not saying they've made Endgame, that they've made that they've got an Iron Man, but that they've got a releasable movie that they think people like, and that it's going to come through. So they've got that. They've got something that they think they can build off of. Especially, apparently, Sasha Calle, the young actress who's, am I pronouncing that correct? I don't know. If not, I'm sorry. I'm working from not a lot of notes here. But the young woman who's playing the new version of Supergirl, I believe they're calling her Kara Zor-El, but Supergirl, basically, apparently that she's very good. Then people really respond well to her. And a lot of times you do have to just release what you have. Even if it's not a sunk cost thing, you do have to put that out. That is the other side of a sunk cost fallacy. Because even if this thing isn't good and people don't like it, the point of it is a reboot picture. Like, the concept of this is that the movie comes out and they use it as an excuse to reboot the stuff that they're no longer using from the, frankly, failed set of movies that they made, and just to launch it and throw a bunch of stuff forward. And not just to say, okay, like, they're not doing this is the trailer for all the new Justice League stuff again. Supposedly, part of the gimmick of this is, again, not, I haven't seen it, so I don't know, but supposedly it doesn't so much end off on a space of this is concretely forever the new DC universe, but this is what it looks like now, and also there's a state of flux and it needs protecting and things can change going forward. So basically, it's a crisis with the promise of more crises to come, so that they can go forward and say, yeah, things are all messed up right now. Because realistically, folks, you know this. You know that they're not going to end off on a movie whose premise is, hey, everything got all messed up and now Batman is old and there's a Batgirl and Superman is Supergirl now and some of it happened and some of it didn't. They're not going to leave it off and then never have a Superman or a younger Batman again. Not when they've already got Robert Pattinson doing his thing in his movies. They've got apparently scripts out for doing another Superman movie. Zack Snyder is tweeting about Henry Cavill. You know they're going to do the regular versions again. They're just also trying to do their, chasing Marvel to do a universe thing. They're not going to finally get The Rock back into a movie playing a character who's as strong as Superman and not have him fight a Superman at some point after he eventually shows up in the Shazam. So come on, use your heads. The issue with this is you don't want it to not come out and then have the same kind of problem you had with the Snyder Cut, which is not so much a problem with the movie. I didn't think the movie was very good. I didn't think Justice League was good. I didn't think Batman v Superman was good. I didn't think that the Snyder Cut version of Zack Snyder's Justice League was good. I think it was all kind of garbage. I like Zack Snyder as a director. I think he turned out to be wrong for this project. I'm capable of holding those two ideas in my head at the same time. Radical concept, I realize. When you let these things sit unreleased and you jerk people around about it as to what these things are, there's that saying, movies aren't released, they escape. It's true. And if you don't let them escape, eventually the concept of what might have been and could have been turns into a whole other thing in people's minds with concept art and theories and people making their own fan art and spinning out. At this point, there's no version of the SnyderVerse that's ever going to satisfy. Even if they did it, even if Zack Snyder came back, made the Zack Snyder Justice League, whatever things, no one is going to eventually be happy with it because they've created this whole other timeline of stuff in their heads out of like concept art, fan art, theories about Ray Fisher coming back. Why would Ray Fisher ever come back from the way he's been treated and the fact that the amount of support that he's gotten from people has mostly amounted to people liking tweets? So I don't know what Warner Brothers should do, bottom line, of this whole ramble. I don't know if they should just release the movie and get it over with, throw it on to HBO Max. It really kind of comes down to what's actually going on with this problem with Ezra Miller, because a lot of these allegations are some really heavy stuff. In any case, yeah, that's where I've been. That's what's been going on here. That video is Flash Movie incoming. Until then, thank you very much. Yeah, this was a ramble. And, yeah. So yeah, all that happened. There's no way to say this without sounding more self-aggrandizing, well, really just making excuses than I have all the previous times, but there's really one thing this whole experience has highlighted for me, and to be clear, what I mean by this whole experience, I mean both last year or so of trying to maintain a working schedule, keeping this show and other projects happening, while also keeping up a legitimate paycheck job, while watching so much of the rest of what's left of independent film commentary YouTube just check out and ride the grift and experience, specifically of putting so much on hold to try and repeatedly get a single fucking coherent goddamn piece of content about this Flash situation at Warner Brothers while it's still in flux, because I don't like saying I'm going to do something and then not being able to follow through, and there's been so much of that over the last few cycles. I didn't want this to be another one, and thus having to watch so much more go undone, having to fall by the wayside, etc., while I wrote scripts, and then having to throw them out again and again 6 fucking times over every time Ezra Miller got in trouble again. Projects got canceled, and there was so much new scandal, everything had to get scrapped and rewritten, and now, only now, do we finally reach a point where this whole thing is finally fucked enough on an almost completely other level that I can say, screw this. This is now the occasion you just put one together, and I can move the fuck on from my own sanity, because the clusterfuck has long since become more compelling than any of the films will ever be, by default, because it sounds like they're just going to end up canceling anything compelling and either go back to making horseshit or fail, fold, and go away, which at this point would be preferable.
Well, gang, what it's highlighted for me, honestly, is that I've been working entirely too hard, putting in entirely too much effort, and putting way too much consideration for the content I put out when it comes to this subject, because clearly nobody else cares. Warner Brothers, whatever's left of Warner Brothers at this point, which is basically an IP library that they're not really using outside of background players for Space Jam 2, Multiversus, and a logo, which they've now changed to be boring and unpleasant looking like the rest of the company, doesn't care. The people in charge don't care. Fandom, such as it is basically proud to be piggies at the trough for this shit, and the rest of this digital fever swamp, forget about it. Grifters, con artists, reading the trend line tea leaves and figuring out which piggies to soak by pretending to be very outraged by wokeness or feminazis or whatnot, shilling for cryptocurrency and NFTs, hoping to get noticed by whichever has-been stand-up comic or disgraced pseudo-academic the algorithm has decided to favor this week. Look, gang, I wanted to believe in the promise of the web as much as the next creator, but any media sphere that gets its philosophy from Jordan Peterson, its political acumen from Jimmy Dore, and its Jesus, I don't even fucking know, because to be honest, I thought this guy had died from Russell Brand, is in need of a start over from scratch situation when it comes to legitimacy.
Anyway, speaking of starting over from scratch, at this point, if you clicked on a video about this, and on this one in particular, I don't think I need to reiterate that the reason the Flash movie is supposedly a big deal is that it was put into production as a loose adaptation of the Flashpoint storyline, which was a Back to the Future 2 time travel makes the world different when you come back reboot thing, and the studio was going to use it to erase all the stuff that people hated from the last, wow, holy shit, Man of Steel came out in 2013, so yeah, the last decade of their DC Extended Universe movies, so yeah, most of it, basically. And it was going to intro some new stuff, like Leslie Grace from In the Heights was going to be Batgirl, and Sasha Calle was the new Supergirl, and Michael Keaton was coming back to play Batman again, but older because his movies were a while ago, and they weren't saying it out loud, but it seemed pretty obvious that the plan was just to do this younger, new hero stuff and ride that to compete with the Marvel movies, because hey, young people in greater diversity is in fact clearly what they're doing, so maybe don't look even more old-fashioned and behind the curve than you already are, especially when you've established that your brand can accommodate extra-canonical classic model stuff like Matt Reeves' Batman, or adults-only stuff like Joker, and you could totally do a traditional Superman or whatever else like that also while you're figuring everything else out. Maybe even hire back that handsome guy from The Witcher who doesn't really seem to have any acting range to speak of, but looks the part and the fans seem to like him, sure, and this has pretty much been the plan since around 2016 or so, and I honestly feel like we'd have already had this, gone through it, it would have worked or not, and we would have moved on, save for, one, the pandemic, remember that? I mean, I know we're all pretending that it basically didn't happen, we didn't lose 1 million people in 2 whole years of our lives, that it's not still going on, and that monkeypox isn't happening now on top of it, but it did happen, and it's probably the main reason all of this didn't happen on schedule and come and go, and we didn't all get to move on, and had it just swirl around and simmer in indecision instead.
And 2, the star of the movie happens to be this kid Ezra Miller, and guys, you know if you watch the other episodes on this, I have bent over fucking backwards to be fair and give the benefit of the doubt to this Ezra Miller. Because I don't want to throw a non-binary actor under the bus in this kind of environment, but at a certain point, this becomes fucking ridiculous. If even a third of this for real, you've got an actor who's on a real-life GTA 5-star wanted rampage across multiple U.S. states and maybe Iceland with minors involved and whatnot, and the idea that Warner Brothers isn't doing anything about this, or at a bare minimum is waiting it out until Flash comes out because apparently that's just so important, is fucking ridiculous in light of everything that's gone down as of now.
Because it feels like that should be the most important thing, right? And it's weird that it's not. Again, I'm doing my level best, and I have been doing my level best to be Mr. Fair-minded about this, but we're about to talk about movie projects and cancellations and budgets and consolidations and tax breaks and write-offs and things done for the health of the brand, and even if someone is only talking in the most cynical, amoral, capitalist, money-driven, profit-over-people framing of this or any other situation, okay, if you've got a lead actor who's in the news globally every other fucking day for tooling around the world with guns and body armor, getting into bar fights and mixing it up with the cops and multiple allegations about minors and sex cults and drugs and all manner of insanity, I mean, whether they're guilty, in which case, what are we even talking about, or releasing the movie, shouldn't that be the most important thing? Isn't that what's best for business? Because right now, in the wake of the collapse of the Warner Brothers AT&T merger and Warner now being Warner Discovery, which to be clear was largely happening around all of this, not because of it, like the DC movies sucking and falling apart, and the Zack Snyder ones being bad, and the producers also screwing him over regardless, and the rest of the movies still being bad after that, and the delays and all that, that didn't help. But the AT&T fucking up and HBO Max not really taking off, and all this getting pawned off to Discovery wasn't caused by that. It was just one part of a much larger maelstrom of corporate fuckery.
And another sidebar, another aspect, maybe the biggest aspect, the most massive to me, of what's so fucking frustrating about the coverage of this whole thing is that said coverage is so dominated by this whole ecosystem of YouTubers and podcasters and posters and streamers and forums and social media influencers who've made being for or against this or that movie or franchise or actor their whole brand, but they don't know anything about, well, anything. These are truly some of the stupidest fucking people I've ever encountered, to the degree that you can even call these people, now that we know that most of the Snyder Cut thing was apparently just bots, but that's a whole other issue. Hey, what, wasn't Elon supposed to be taking care of that? Get on this, buddy. I mean, don't tell me the Tesla guy's full of shit, too. I can only take so much loss of faith in one cycle.
Regardless, you got all this content being generated by whoever for or against this or that media, and now they've pivoted to trying to cover the business side of the Warner Brothers stuff, but none of them actually seem to know anything about the movie business or Hollywood or the film industry, or have even seen any other movies.
I don't know what Parasite is. I don't give a shit about Parasite. It's fine. It won Best Foreign Film. You know why? Because it's a goddamn foreign film. Joker, let's talk about Joker, okay? Look at United States of America right now. What is more important to our culture than the Joker?
So the coverage is just this feedback loop of imaginary melodrama where they pick out a studio executive whose name they only just learned as the heroes or the villain, and who's based or not, and these idiotic conspiracy theories where every decision at every level of these billion-dollar telecom giants somehow goes back to whether or not someone is suppressing the continuity of a piece of shit Justice League movie. It would be embarrassing if it weren't sad, and sad if it weren't maddening. Because in the midst of this, back in reality, this past week, Warner Brothers had to make the shareholders report, so actual news got made, and after their Comic-Con presentation goes over like a lead balloon, even though they brought The Rock out, because someone let a Henry Cavill's gonna show up rumor trend all weekend, instead of getting in front of it and pushing back, they let everyone be disappointed, and then Marvel got on stage right after and went, oh, so here's all Phase 5 and the next 2 Avengers movies we're gonna own the next couple years still, mic drop, bye-bye. It turns out Warner's big saving throw, and their plan for everything was to cancel the Batgirl movie.
I don't think it's gonna work. No? Triunfo Napoleon.
Okay, yeah, slightly more complicated than that, but it actually involves a lot more corporate fuckery. Basically, Warner Discovery's new boss, David Zaslav, is cutting costs, dumping projects, firing people all over the company, and shrinking down the size of everything. And part of that is consolidating the streaming stuff together while trying not to look like that's what's going on. And among the other stuff that happened was taking 2 projects that were basically finished but begun under the previous regime in Batgirl and the sequel to Scoob, and opting to just cancel and unrelease them under the pretext of we don't think they're good enough, but really so they can write them off for a tax savings of a pretty small sum, but supposedly saving money in some fashion. So the movie, which had a script from the writer of Birds of Prey and was being directed by the 2 guys who did Bad Boys 3 and oversaw a bunch of Miss Marvel, now can't come out. Nobody gets to see it. Everybody's hard work goes to waste. This young actress doesn't get a big franchise break. Doesn't matter that Warner Brothers promoted the movie and had her out in costume meeting fans and such. Doesn't matter, apparently. And as you can imagine, actual legitimate entertainment media, you know, places with standards that employ professionals, with people actually in the industry who know about shit and have experience, have called this out as bullshit, pointed out how disrespectful it is to the creators and the star.
Wow, I can't believe you're really going to make my movie.
Jay, we're not making your movie.
What? Why?
It's too good.
What are you doing with my script?
I'm putting it with the others that were also too good. Look at this. A lesbian love story, the biography of some clown named Galileo, Revenge of the Nerds 4. What are you doing here, you beautiful thing, when you could be making me a mint? Hey, fellas, start shooting!
Hooray!
My script.
Whereas in the fandom media, as constituted here on YouTube, streamers, social media, forum goons, etc., it was received with immediate positivity for exactly the same reason, i.e. it's fucking great news that a movie with an Afro-Latina female lead was cancelled. It's a blow against wokeism and forced diversity and all the shit that fake nerd media won't shut up about, even while swearing that it's not just another venue for phony right-wing culture war grievance.
Forget all these fucking social problems that Joker touched upon. Let's have a better woke agenda, and let's go full fucking woke, and let's give Parasite, the first fucking thing they said, Parasite, the first foreign language movie to ever win Best Picture. Well, pat yourself on the fucking back, Academy.
This has been the Canadian truckers and Dutch farmers of comment sections. Really, I thought it was bad when Empire Magazine put Galadriel on the cover, manspreading with her legs so wide you expect Durin's Bane to come flying out of her vag.
M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous. Until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any one of them.
Oh, and it definitely meant that the SnyderVerse was going to be restored at any minute, and Ben Affleck would be Batman again instead of just shooting a cameo for Aquaman 2, and Henry Cavill would be Superman again. There's been zero indication that's the case, but sure. And Dad's finally going to come back from going out to get cigarettes and going to get back together with Mom, and all the audiences all over the world are going to realize they were wrong about all those movies sucking, and they'll apologize to you personally, and it'll be all thanks to Warner Discovery executive based God Emperor David Zaslav. I mean, seriously, look at these things I'm putting up right now on screen. These are not fake tweets and memes and whatever. These are real. These are all real. I'm scrubbing most of the names and tags off because some of the people might outgrow this shit and be embarrassed later because they should be embarrassed. But, I mean, can you imagine anything more pathetic than actually fanboying for a fucking reality TV executive? I mean, I guess maybe it's as sad as the guys who were still all over Elon's dick, but at least that guy pretended to invent stuff and, has his own spaceship. I mean, when people did this for Walt Disney back in the day, that guy had a TV show where he pretended to talk to the cartoons and showed you how he was building rides and stuff. This is just pathetic. This is like that whole Dark MAGA, Dark Brandon shit, or those guys who drew cartoons where Trump was all jacked and beating up the libs instead of being a gross tub of goo, right? And just like with that, they'll say, oh no, we're being ironic, we're only doing it to trigger people, but no, not really, right? Nobody buys that. And for a TV CEO.
But, by the way, do you know who this guy is? I mean, I know, like I just said, that this is all about people who just found out who executives were and are pretending you know it. Do you actually know who David Zaslav is? Like, why you're supposed to know this guy's name from Adam? David Zaslav is the guy. Do you remember when TLC and Discovery used to actually be networks like Discovery and the Learning Channel, and then they became the lifestyle thing or whatever, and it turned into just pseudoscience and fake reality shows with Honey Boo Boo and the 19 Kids and Counting. You remember that? The Duggars, the Jesus people with the fucking Barney Rubble foreheads were just squirting out kids to make the Army of Christ or whatever. Remember that shit? Honey Boo Boo and all that. He's that guy. He's the guy that turned Discovery and TLC into that and found success doing that. That's his big claim to fame. He's that guy. He's the Honey Boo Boo guy. That's his success model for television, is David Zaslav, is the Duggars and Honey Boo Boo. That's why you're supposed to know who he is. That's why he's a successful producer. He's never done movie production before. He's the guy who he decided Sarah Palin should have a reality show. That's David Zaslav.
But the thing is, it's all fake, isn't it? That's what this really ultimately crystallized for me, and honestly made me able to finally put this to bed as a big picture topic to be waiting around on. Just the phony, useless meaninglessness of even trying to cover something that the people making it don't care about, and really doesn't seem like there's a sincere, real audience that cares about. Like I said, there's been 5 and 6 different scripts at varying stages of completion for this Flashpoint or Flash movie episode, theorizing how the movie was going to go and whether or not it was a good idea or what the future of it looked like, and I was gonna want to look at what we knew about the Batgirl movie and the possible Supergirl stuff and the Blue Beetle and Zatanna, are those still even happening? Do we know? I mean, I wouldn't bet on it. Maybe if their actors went on a few felony assault and robbery sprees, their projects would become uncancelable too. And compare it to how back in the day when the original post-crisis DC stuff did not work. People forget that, by the way. The immediate post-crisis Infinite Earths DC Universe refresh was not very well received. You know, Justice League Detroit was this whole miserable failure. DC Editorial didn't just go back to Plan Zero. They went with a different direction into what became the Justice League International era, which was a very new angle for a lot of stuff at the time, but turned out to be exactly what the brand needed and a necessary paving of the way to Grant Morrison's let's get back to the big guns stuff. And you know, I think that was shaping up to have some real parallels here, but anyway, that's definitely not what's happening now under the Honey Boo Boo guy, so who the fuck even knows? And also, clearly, it doesn't matter to fans because where are the Release the Snyder Cut people? I mean, here's the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery fucking over filmmakers, stars, and crew of a DC movie and a bunch of other stuff too, but I won't overtax y'all by asking you to process more than one thought at a time, canceling it at the finish line for nakedly bullshit corporate tax stuff, screwing with creative vision. One of the directors was at his wedding when he found out. What the hell?
Another shocking twist!
Yes, and I have a message for you from Colonel Matumbe. He says, this is from Congo Jack.
I mean, I was told repeatedly for several years there was this whole huge grassroots movement of people who were very concerned about respecting creators' rights and seeing filmmakers' visions brought to completion at this studio with these intellectual properties specifically, and now crickets? No, not even crickets. Crickets would be bad enough. Instead, I'm seeing cheerleading for the fucking corporate guy doing the canceling, not standing up for the artists or the directors or the creators or this actress who's had her big break thrown out. So I guess y'all were full of shit about supporting that dude who played Cyborg and why. Nope, everybody's on their knees to make a god emperor out of the fucking Honey Boo Boo guy because he might somehow eventually turn around and give you some version of what you think you want when he's done screwing these people out of their hard work and livelihood. And even if he doesn't, well, apparently it's good enough that certain people got dunked on or destroyed because what? Perceptions of politics, ideological crap, wokeness, anti-wokeness? Fuck off now and forever with the self-righteous bullshit that has now been laid completely bare for everyone to see, and that frankly those of us who knew what it was all along knew all along. A fake, trumped up in multiple senses of that phrasing, bullshit internet con job by disingenuous, performative, insincere, goddamn liars. Because if you were really mad about the Snyder Cut for all the fancy-sounding, high-minded reasons you claimed, you'd be just as mad about this. And you're not. Not in the same numbers, not at the same level, and plenty just not at all or even straight up on the other fucking side. If I'm wrong, prove me wrong. I'm sure that button that turns on the bots still works. I'm sure all those banners and Skywriters' phone numbers are still out there, and everybody who matters can see it. Straight on through to the real, hollow, empty center of the thing. And so I'm done. Done trying to follow this, done trying to care, and done trying to be fair about it. I'm sure there'll be more to talk about, there always is, but I'm done trying to parse it out even-handedly and coddle fanboys and pretend that there's a reason to give a shit about the future of this when we can all see that it doesn't fucking matter. I have enormous empathy for the people who might still be trying to make decent content under Warner Discovery, but frankly, this guy is everything wrong about the mentality of modern Hollywood, and I can't not root for any plan that he does claim to have to fail. The best thing that could happen to Warner Discovery is for the whole thing to collapse to the ground and for some other entity to take over all of this shit. This is a person, a whole conceptual type of guy, really, honestly, and a mentality that should have as little power and influence in popular culture as possible. And you need only look at the kind of people who've decided to fangasm over it to know that I'm right about this. You got a problem with that? I don't fucking care.
Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. You're cool. And fuck you, I'm out.
The hierarchy of power in the DC universe is exactly where it was. Static, hanging in place, waiting for David Zaslav to finish stripping Warner Brothers for parts, but pretending like there's a long-term strategy and gesturing at dumb fanboys of one stripe or another to generate at least one weekend's worth of hype to get this or that project over the finish line because all the headlining actors are also producers with co-financing deals in the productions they lined up before this whole thing started to shit the bed. This week's candidate is Black Adam, technically a spin-off of Shazam that the studio's been trying to get off the ground with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in the title role for something like 12 years, long enough to keep John Johnson from taking what you'd have to assume was every single offer Marvel could think of in the intervening decade, go back and forth between playing good Shazam or bad Shazam, settling on bad Shazam, the studio to decide bad Shazam actually warranted his own movie, when Johnson went from a B-grade movie star to the only movie star, not named Tom Cruise, and for that movie to arrive reconceived with only a passing mention of its own base franchise, instead as more of a soft relaunch of a brand refresh for the ongoing dumpster fire of the DC Extended Universe by way of a thoroughly spoiled post-credits cameo appearance made possible by two actors sharing an agent who happens to be The Rock's business manager and co-producer of his movies. So, yeah, you're basically watching a feature-length concept trailer for the potential of The Rock as Black Adam should they decide to make something closer to an actual fully thought-out movie with him, with the simulacra of one occupying space for now being basically a disposable demo reel, where the most damning criticism one can deliver is that it plays exactly like New Line Cinema in 1996, shooting a Marvel script from 2015, and still manages to be better than most of what Warner Brothers has tried to pass off as superhero movies lately. I mean, make no mistake, Black Adam is garbage, and it's goddamn ridiculous that they spent however much they did on this when so much of the third act still looks exactly like fucking Spawn, but it's peppy, enthusiastic garbage, and at least you don't have to take like a week off work to try and finish it like that last Batman thing, and, you know, compared to the Snyder Cut or Wonder Woman 1984, I mean, Christ, this might as well be Citizen fucking Kane. And for a hot minute in the middle of itself, it almost shows signs of having found not just a reason for this DC movie, but the whole blighted project to exist in this oversaturated market, i.e. taking its unavoidable status as a chintzy B-movie inevitably paying catch-up to the Marvel machine as a chance to be a weird, sloppy, and dangerous thing in the way the Disney brand can't. It grounds its action firmly in an exploited Middle Eastern setting, has the citizen get in the Western superheroes' faces about only getting involved on behalf of Western hegemony, it gets off lines about neo-imperialism and not your country, not your decision, and lets the ostensible figureheads of American power be basically bad guys instead of just gesturing at that idea, but ultimately coming down on the compromise Marvel ends up at all the time, i.e. Pax Americana is good, actually, so long as it's basically the cast of the West Wing in Halloween costumes doing Empire maintenance. I mean, it doesn't really pay off at all, because that would require follow-through, and this is still a Warner Brothers movie after all, so instead, Johnson's Black Adam, for the record, an accidentally resurrected superhuman god warrior with the same basic powers as Shazam, thought to be an ancient protector of a secluded Middle Eastern nation exploited for rare earth minerals who swears he's super but not really a hero for reasons he can't wait to be cryptic about, and the Justice Society, a hastily assembled set of Kmart Avengers scrambled up to rein him in, barely have time to register any real disagreement among themselves before it's time for them to team up against the mandatory generic Act 3 PlayStation 4 era CGI boss monster, because if it didn't work before, and it hasn't, maybe it'll work now? Another weird thing is that it's another superhero entry like The Boys that's sort of arguing with a version of the genre that doesn't actually exist in terms of deconstruction. Black Adam isn't really evil or even all that mean, and he doesn't have much in the way of a coherent ideology. The sole thing that supposedly makes him bad versus the other superheroes, here exemplified by the Justice Society, is that he's entirely willing to kill his enemies, but like, every superhero does that now, and has for a while. Like, Superman kills people, Batman kills people, Aquaman kills a lot of people. The Avengers do tons of war crimes, and then they did a whole movie about how not letting them do war crimes would be the worst war crime. So by the time the Justice Society shows up here, like, hey, we're the by-the-book superheroes, stop killing people, it's like, since when? What kind of candy-ass super team is this? Birkenstocks here beheads people, and she comes from like the island of gender studies. But the Justice Society themselves are kind of a hoot, honestly. Well-cast, fun actors, each given a costume and exactly one character trait, because they figure by now everyone will just fill in the blanks for a genre entry this paint by numbers. So our setup is bald, mean, not Superman versus Angry Bird, sleepy drama queen, Patrick Star, and the CW. Everybody's got good chemistry, especially the young characters. There's some fun back and forth, and I like the relationship between Black Adam and the single mom and little kid who wake him up, even though it's fully telegraphed where that's all expected to go. If they make more of these, especially if you remember like the last decade or so of Black Adam appearances in DC. Mostly I'd like to see what this looked like 4 or 5 cuts ago when presumably there was more character stuff that they chopped out to make this stupid third act. Like I said, it's not good, like, at all, but I didn't hate it. It's fun until it's not. The Rock is charismatic enough to carry almost anything, so yeah, he can almost carry even one of these. 6 out of 10, you won't catch me pretending that this means the DCEU is suddenly a real thing made of real movies with a real future, or that Warner Discovery is a real studio, and I'm a real shareholder. But it's not a complete loss. I gotta be honest, guys. What I wanted to do here more than anything is to run the Layla Dead Bodies montage from Goodfellas over all this So That Happened stuff, but with my voice talking about how everything went down. But YouTube and the studios have been fucking beasts about the copyright strikes on stuff like that, and the entire point of doing these long episodes is to just get that revenue, and that'd defeat the purpose. So whether or not you'd see me doing the cold read here, or we just tried a version of it with stills and maybe get that joke off that way and different music, is just, I don't know, try and imagine a better version in your head, and just cut me a break this once, okay? Yeah. Black Adam opened to so-so reviews, not great box office, and the only real story coming out of its opening weekend being Henry Cavill showing up for a cameo at the end, and for a nanosecond seemed like a ton of enthusiastic chatter over the SnyderVerse getting resurrected, immediately got shot down by the guns of reality. No, it wasn't. He's in there because he and The Rock have the same manager who produced the movie and is also The Rock's ex-wife, and also, hey, Warner Brothers has hired James Gunn to create a whole new DC film slate instead, and this is not part of it in no small way, because The Rock's operation made a bunch of power plays that didn't work out. Even as the new regime was solidifying, Johnson's was on social media posting kinda unhinged videos about how the movie really was a success and he was totally going to be in the new one, and no, that was not happening at all, Dwayne. On the TV end of things, the CW Flash show got one last season to wrap up all the stuff that should have wrapped up 2 seasons ago, and they're also trying a new thing called Gotham Knights that seems like it made it through under the buzzer, but nobody seems to care. David Zaslav talked up combining HBO and Discovery into one thing for streaming, and then backed off, and then backed back on because it looked like not enough people who had Discovery wanted HBO, but now it's just called Max. And the last gasp Shazam Fury of the Gods opened to a fizzle at the box office, and the press seemed more concerned with whether Zachary Levi being a weirdo on social media or The Rock refusing to participate in the franchise was more to blame for that. Which I guess brings us up to date. But this is the way the story of the DCEU had been all along. Nobody had a plan. Nobody really seemed to be making movies they wanted to be making. The studio didn't even seem to be that interested in having a universe based on DC properties, or making that many movies in the genre until they felt like they had to because it was working so well for Marvel and Disney, and when they tried, it didn't yield the same results right away. They kept spiraling and falling apart and collapsing in on itself. Sure, it wasn't all bad and like all grand Hollywood boondoggles. A lot of very talented creators, actors, and crew did their best within a bad situation, and it sucks that their hard work mostly gets subsumed in the muck. You know, the pandemic crashing right on top of everything didn't help matters. Without it, it probably wouldn't have had to endure the extra 3 years worth of maybes about when and if this all was getting thrown out, but it wasn't the deciding factor for all of it, for any of it. The studio, for the most part, put this whole thing in motion without caring enough about how it turned out. The audience repaid them in kind by not caring about careless product, and that plus a pandemic throwing multiple competing versions of what should have been an easy cut your losses and start over reboot decision into limbo is how you get yourself a self-perpetuating human centipedal feedback loop of absolute fucking garbage. So now it's a game of waiting. Not so much for The Flash at this point, that's a foregone conclusion, regardless of what actually happens in it, because whatever does happen is going to yield the same general results that are already in the pipeline. The wait, even with a new property like Blue Beetle and one last holdover sequel in Aquaman 2, is for the new initiative to start up under what James Gunn and Peter Safran are doing, and hope for the best, I guess. I already covered that business in another episode. Looking back over all of this, with this recording, the most recent thing that's happened is Warner Discovery changing the name of HBO Max to just Max and announcing a streaming reboot of Harry Potter with J.K. Rowling involved, so everyone will be mad about that instead. What strikes me trying to sum it all up is how tiring and pointless it's all seemed. You know, I thought going back and looking over it, some idea would emerge other than, well, this was a big waste of mine and everyone else's time, but no, that pretty much nails it. What was clear from the outset was that nobody at Warner Brothers, back when there actually was a Warner Brothers at the start of the DCEU project, wanted to make movies out of DC Comics characters other than maybe Batman. And they knew they had to keep that brand alive because it was kind of always had been since 1989, and they felt like they at least had to try with Superman because it's Superman, but there wasn't some big push to do a whole line of these things. They only felt like they had to because Marvel was doing it. Otherwise, they didn't feel a big push, and you know, that was actually probably fine in hindsight. That was the better way to look at it. Not everything needs to be a movie, especially if no one is champing at the bit to make it, and Warner executives were clearly invested in other material, whether the audience was there for this or not. Those are the breaks sometimes. And it's not like there weren't DC adaptations happening. They were all over TV and animation. There were tons of cartoons, tons of animated movies. There was that whole thing on the CW. It's possible we just didn't need two whole superhero universes running in movies at the same time just because comics had always worked that way because reasons. But the studio felt obligated to because the fans and the market made a lot of noise about it, and the DC Extended Universe never stopped feeling like something that the people paying for it were only doing because they thought the numbers were saying they had to, even after the numbers stopped telling them that and instead started saying, actually, nobody wants this. But what came of it in the end? Most of the films were garbage or forgettable. Multiple careers and a whole studio apparatus have been destroyed. The whole brand, a franchise, whatever you want to call it, now has a stain on it that's going to linger for a long time, and the effect on the rest of film and publishing industries are profound. This was an unmitigated disaster. And for what? There isn't even a new lesson to learn here that everyone involved shouldn't have already known from a dozen other failures in film or business history. Going back over years of these episodes and observations, all I can see is myself struggling and failing to find new ways to describe what's happening when it's all so clear, but the news churn demanded everyone pretend like something new was happening, and it wasn't. I wanted to come away from this looking back feeling purged, cleansed, cleaned out something. Instead, I feel emptied. I hope that I put out something entertaining in my work amid all this, but the DCEU era itself, almost none of this will have mattered. It's like when I tell people in their 20s that, yeah, no, really, there were 7 Police Academy movies, and they just asked me to explain why. More than anything, I wanted to leave off on some hopeful note about how the world needs heroes. These characters are timeless and important. You know, the Superman is the modern extension of Arthur and Moses, Joseph Campbell's monomyth, and fade in and out on images of constellations and cave paintings, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sorry, I'm so fucking tired of regurgitating versions of that platitude, and I agree with it. Fucking hell, I'm rooting for James Gunn's whole thing to succeed because I like him and a lot of the people involved, but I just can't come in at the end of another one of these things and act like it's so important that we always have new Superman movies and new Batman movies and whatever, because no, it's not. Only if someone thinks there's a story worth telling about Superman or Batman is there a reason to have them. Otherwise, it's just brand management and marketing sales. Keeping an IP in rotation because it needs to be, and that's how we got into this mess in the first place. The DC and/or Marvel pantheons aren't going anywhere, and neither are any of the others. This is our world now, nerds, like it or not, and for real, the whole dredging up Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and the monomyth to elevate these things and demonstrate that they descend from the classical tradition and the human experience. Is there anyone left who's still fucking impressed by that? Because I realize I'm 42, so hearing my comparative lit professors whip out, hey kids, did you notice Baby Moses in the basket, Baby Superman in the rocket, Momotaro in the peach, was still a new thing when I was coming up, but isn't that just the regular curriculum now? So what? So buttons. If anything now, that's a better argument to have new things than to continue venerating the old things. So I don't have a summation, really. I don't have any big profundities. I don't have a mythic statement to go out on, because the point of this is that there was no point. The DCEU was trash. It meant nothing. And so there's nothing to be left about it, said about it, or learned from it. It was a long don't list. I wish James Gunn all the best of luck, because if we're doing more of these, I hope they're good, and I hope they mean something. Guardians 3 is fucking great, so it's in good hands, but if we're doing more of these, they'd better mean something. Because this meant nothing. And if the studios and filmmakers have decided that there need to be more of these, okay. And I'll watch them, and I'm sure most of you will too. And I hope they're good. But we did so much fighting about this, and so much arguing and discussing, analyzing, and it didn't amount to anything. It's good for these things to be your entertainment. Maybe it's even okay for them to be your mythology. But they shouldn't be your life. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.